Chapter 498. The super spicy dish really is extraordinary, but it's so delicious. I feel like my entire body is on fire. It's like my insides are on fire. Vivian panted heavily with sweat beading on her forehead as she looked at Luna with elation. It's too spicy. I don't think I can eat too much. Otherwise, I'm going to get heaty tomorrow. Luna's nose and eyes were both red, and she was gently wiping away the tears that were flowing uncontrollably from the corners of her eyes with a white handkerchief. This level of spiciness was already beyond her tolerance level, and she couldn't even handle a little bit of it. Don't worry, Luna. I won't get heaty. I eat it every day, and I'm fine. Vivian waved a hand in response before placing another large piece of fish into her mouth. The spicy sensation spread throughout her entire body, and the residual frosty energy within her body was slowly dispelled. After the spiciness level increased, this sensation became more pronounced again. At this rate, I feel like I'll be able to make a full recovery in a month or two, Vivian said with elation. Then you should eat more. This spicy grilled fish was made just for you. Luna was also looking at Vivian with a smile on her face. Countless doctors and magic casters were at a loss for what to do, but in the end, Vivian's condition had been cured by a delicious spicy grilled fish. What a wonderful coincidence. Vivian nodded with a smile and said, "That's right. He was born just for me. When I recover from my illness, I'm going to give Boss Mag a plaque with the words Unparalleled Divine Doctor written on it." Luna couldn't help but burst into laughter. She tapped Vivian's forehead with an exasperated look and said, "If you give Mr. Mac a plaque, where is he going to hang it? He's clearly a good chef." A restaurant owner who can't treat illnesses isn't a good chef. Vivian shrugged in response. "You're such a jerk." Luna scooped a spoonful of tofu, putting into her mouth to alleviate the spiciness in her mouth. In her opinion, bland food was more suitable for her. That elf was really good-looking. It's a pity that he's gone. It's been a long time since I've seen a man who's pleasing to the eye. Vivian looked back at the restaurant with a wistful expression. "You like him?" Luna asked with a smile. "Of course not. How could I like him?" Vivian raised an eyebrow as she whispered. "Besides, do you think a good-looking guy like him would like a woman who's uglier than him? For such a man, other than finding a prettier woman, the only other option left is to find another man." "Don't talk nonsense." Luna glared at Vivian, her eyes filled with fear. "Hee, that's hard to say," Vivian replied nonchalantly as she continued to eat her grilled fish. Luna's her fiancé's. The Bybilly family was even more powerful than the Brewster family in the Elven race, which was why the engagement had been set without her. However, Sally had only seen her fiancé, who was known as the most handsome man in the Elven race, when she was young. He was a shy little boy who liked to hide in a tree, and she had never seen him again. She didn't expect him to find Mamie's today, and it was obvious that he was here for her. Who was the person at noon? Sally frowned as she thought to herself. Her peaceful life seemed to have been disrupted all of a sudden. Should she resign herself to her fate and return to the Wind Forest, or should she leave Mama's and continue to wander around? Both choices made her feel a little frustrated. "Aisha, what's wrong?" Yabamiya gently patted Sally's arm and handed her the gold coin that she had just received with a concerned look on her face. "Oh, it's nothing." Sally forced a smile and took the gold coins from Yabamiya's hands. She pulled herself together and continued to collect money and clean the table. "What happened to Aisha? She's not like this normally." Yabamiya looked at Sally with a worried expression, but she was quickly called over by the customers next to her, and she began to work again. Sally ran away from home, so logically speaking, it's normal for her family to want her to return home. However, it's up to her whether she wants to go back or not. If it's really necessary, perhaps we can ask Crassus and Julian to help her. Meg also looked at Sally with a worried expression. Although he had expected this day to come, he still felt a little conflicted when it actually happened. "Boss Mag, I still sincerely invite you to open a restaurant on the Chaotic Islands. I swear on the reputation of the vampire race that I will ensure your safety and business. Your business will definitely not be worse than here." Dracula paid for his meal and walked to the entrance of the kitchen with a sincere expression. Before Mag could reply, many hostile gazes had already landed on him. All of the customers in the restaurant were looking at him meaningfully. This was a blatant attempt to snatch someone away from them right in front of their faces. Do you think the reputation of the vampire race is more intimidating than the two of us? Crassus looked at Dracula and said meaningfully. Back then, there was a big-mouthed ogre among the ogres who promised in the name of the ogres that he would eat me. After that, ogres ceased to exist in this world, Julian said in a hoarse voice. Urian's voice was very calm, and it was as if he were talking about something completely normal. Mr. Mack, I think it's a good idea for you to open a restaurant here. If I have time in the future, I'll come to eat here more often. I'll take my leave now. Please enjoy your meal, my lords and everyone. Dracula felt a chill run down his spine, but he quickly forced a smile onto his face. He walked out of the restaurant as he spoke without looking back. As soon as he walked out of the restaurant, he spread his arms, and a pair of large black wings appeared. He flapped his wings and flew into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. This guy really does listen to his heart. He's not pretentious at all. Meg raised his eyebrows and swallowed the words of rejection that were about to come out of his mouth. Boss, little Amy, goodbye. Yaba Mia and Sally bade farewell before leaving the restaurant together. Mia, you can go back first. I still have something to do, Sally said to Yaba Mia after they exited the restaurant. Aisha, are you really all right? Yaba Mia was still looking at Sally with concern. Sally had been a little distracted since the beginning, and now she was going to travel alone. I'm fine. I'm just going to see someone. You don't have to worry. Sally shook her head, and a smile appeared on her face. At least someone was still concerned about her. All right, then go home early. Yaba Mia nodded, and waved goodbye to Sally before turning to leave. Chapter 499. Let's go. There are some things that we shouldn't talk about. Blower looked down at Sally with a lazy expression. He gently pressed a hand against the tree branch beneath him, and his body drifted down. He then tapped a tree branch lightly before flying deeper into the plaza. Sally looked on at Blower's departing figure and hesitated momentarily before quickly catching up to him. She also quickly disappeared into the forest. Father, are we not going to sleep yet? Amy yawned as she looked at Meg. Yes, we're going now. Meg withdrew his gaze, opened the door, and flipped the sign over before picking up Amy and Ugly Duckling and making his way upstairs. There was a limit to what he could do for Sally. Before he recovered his powers, it would be wise for him to keep a low profile in the elven race. As such, he could only let Sally make her own decision. Tell me, why did you come to find me? If you're here to persuade me to go back to the Wind Forest, then you can give up. I definitely won't go back now. Sally stopped in her tracks as she looked at Blower. Her voice was a little cold, and there was a hint of wariness in her eyes. It wasn't easy for me to come to Chaos City. I don't want to go back so soon. Blower turned to Sally with a lazy smile and said, Ingve received news that you're staying at the Gaia Hotel and working at Amy's, so he sent word back to the Bybili family. After that, my father told me to come to Chaos City to find you. His objective is very simple. He wants to get close to you and make you like me as much as possible. After that, we can continue the engagement between our two families. Even if you know where I live, you won't be able to stop me if I want to leave. You're only a 7th-tier magic caster, and Ambassador Ingve is also a 7th-tier magic caster. Sally's expression became slightly grave. Her worst-case scenario had been confirmed. Blower really was here for her, and it wasn't just a coincidence that they had bumped into each other. Moreover, the Bybili family already knew that she was here, so it wasn't realistic for her to continue staying at Amy's. However, she didn't know why Blower was telling her all of this. If his objective was to get close to her, then what he was doing now was very perplexing. You don't have to be nervous. I don't like you, and I've never thought of marrying you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have told you this as soon as we met. Instead, I would have slowly approached you and made you fall in love with me according to their plan. Blower looked at the wary Sally, who was about to attack him, and smiled as he said, Of course. With my stunning looks, I don't even need to follow their plans to make any woman fall in love with me. Then what do you want? Sally's brows furrowed slightly as she looked at Blower. She had heard about his narcissistic behavior back in the Wind Forest, and it appeared that it wasn't just a rumor. However, what she was concerned about was what he had just said. If he also didn't like her and was trying to resist, then perhaps they could talk things out. I want many things, but that doesn't include you. However, if you want to continue staying at Chaos City or Amy's, then you'd better cooperate with me. Otherwise, even I can't guarantee that the Brewster family won't find out about your presence here. Blower turned to Sally with a smile. Cooperate with what? Sally asked. They sent me to Chaos City to get close to you, then create some kind of possibility between us. This possibility is related to the marriage between the Bybilly family and the Brewster family. If they find out that there's no possibility between us, then they'll use this information as a bargaining chip in exchange for some benefits from the Brewster family. However, if they think that there's a chance that I'll be able to win you over and get this marriage back on track, then they'll do everything in their power to create more time for us to spend together. In fact, they'll even take the initiative to prevent news of your presence in Chaos City from spreading. Blower looked at Sally with a serious expression as he said, hence, what you need to do is to cooperate with me and pretend that you're interested in me. That way, you'll be able to gain more time to yourself. Sally looked at Blower in silence for a long while before asking, what's your objective for doing this? What do you want from me? My objective is very simple. I want to give you more freedom, but also give me more freedom. Chaos City is very interesting, so I want to stay here for a while longer. As for you, I hope you can give me a promise. Blower's smile faded as he spoke with a serious expression. What promise? Sally looked at Blower with a wary expression. She didn't believe that there would be a free lunch waiting for her in this world. Furthermore, this was the fiancé of a family that was trying so hard to get her to marry into their family. You might not be aware of this, but Princess Irina left the Cave of Life this morning and killed the leader of the Kroll family, Schubert. Blower didn't directly state his conditions. Instead, he changed the subject. What? Sally was slightly startled to hear this, and she stared at Blower with incredulity in her eyes. Schubert was the Chief Justice of the Kroll family and held an extremely lofty position in the Elven race. In fact, the Kroll family was even more influential than the Brewster family. Yet, Blower was telling her that Princess Irina had killed Schubert? How could something like that have happened? Ingve just received a letter from his family this afternoon. Blower didn't keep Sally in suspense and gave her a summary of the contents of the letter. He looked at Sally, whose expression gradually changed, and said with a serious expression, Schubert brought his own death upon himself, and Her Majesty's pardon decree confirms that. Even though Princess Irina has been confined for a year, compared to Schubert's death, it's quite clear what that means. Are elves who have lost their freedom no longer elves? Sally listened to Blower's words, and she felt as if the education she had received since she was a child had been dealt a massive blow. Your Highness, I also agree with what you said about freedom. However, the current elven race is powerful and free. If we were to overturn the current system of the elven race, or even overthrow the major families, the elven race would definitely become weaker and even weaker than before. If other races were to invade us again, what would the elven race do? If that were to happen, even more elves would lose their freedom and be subjected to even more humiliation. Sally was silent for a moment before shaking her head and said, what we need to do now is to bring more wandering elves back to the Wind Forest. Only then will the elven race become even more powerful. Chapter 500. Why wouldn't they want to go back? Only in the Wind Forest can they receive the blessings of the God of Life and receive the protection of the powerful elven race. If they wander outside, they have to face threats from foreign races every day. Even their survival is a problem, so what happiness and freedom are they talking about? Sally looked at Blower with a firm expression. Even though I've only left the Wind Forest a few times, in my eyes, this world is different from what you see. The elves who wander outside the Wind Forest don't often face threats from foreign races. On the contrary, many elves are able to successfully integrate into the local life. For example, in Chaos City, the elves have joined the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple and become the city's administrators. Their lives are stable and free. Blower shook his head. He looked at Sally's tightly furrowed brows, and a hint of mockery appeared on his face as he said, "Also, don't you know why they're leaving the Wind Forest?" After the war among species, Mistress Helena initiated a revolution among the elven race, and the number of elves leaving the Wind Forest increased year by year. They weren't abandoned by the god of life. This was their own choice. They don't want protection. They want freedom. Elves are naturally protected by nature, and the god of life won't abandon them just because they leave the Wind Forest. She also worships freedom. I believe in what I've seen. At the very least, the elves in the Wind Forest are living a peaceful life. Furthermore, very few elves have left the Wind Forest in recent years. Instead, more and more elves are returning to the Wind Forest. Doesn't that mean that the Wind Forest is becoming better and better? Sally pondered for a moment, but the determination in her eyes was no longer as resolute as before. They're not leaving because they've been shackled. There's an invisible wall around the Wind Forest. As for the elves who have returned to the Wind Forest, do you think they've all returned to the Wind Forest willingly to become slaves of the major families? The freedom and ease you've received in the Wind Forest is built on the premise that many elven slaves have been exploited. Other than stability, do they have any freedom? Blower's smile became even more derisive. He was looking at Sally as if he were looking at an innocent little girl who had been born in a major elven family and had been raised in a traditional family. If it were anyone else, Blower would have already turned around and left. However, Sally's identity was quite special, and he could see her compassion for the elves. From her perspective, Helena's reforms had made the elven race more powerful and stable. The major families appeared to be glamorous on the surface, but each of them had their own responsibilities, making the entire elven race more efficient. This was a tangible benefit to the elven race after the reforms. He had once viewed the elven race in the same light, and there was even a period of time where he held Helena in high esteem, thinking that she had changed the elven race for the better and allowed them to live comfortable lives. However, he began to come into contact with the elves living at the bottom of the social ladder, as well as the elves who had voluntarily returned to the Wind Forest. Only then did he slowly discover what kind of darkness was lurking beneath the glamour of the major families. Helena's reforms were undoubtedly a disaster for the elven race. As such, Blower could see a reflection of himself in Sally, and he also hoped that the wandering elves would be able to return to the Wind Forest to live comfortable lives. Now, he only wanted to help more elves escape from the elven race's former Holy Land and allow them to live in a more expansive world with more freedom. Sally looked into Blower's eyes and felt as if his words were ringing out in her mind like a drum. She couldn't help but think of the busy servants in her family. They seemed to never have time to rest and were constantly busy. If they weren't careful, they could be scolded. Are they really happy? Sally thought to herself. She shook her head internally at the thought of all those exhausted faces. She rarely even saw smiles on their faces, so how could they be happy? That's right, after becoming slaves, they had lost their freedom and couldn't even leave the territory of the major families. Even though all of the major families accepted elves as slaves in accordance with the elven law, when Sally calmed down and thought about it, she discovered that those elves who hadn't done anything wrong and had only become slaves because they had mistakenly barged into the territories of the major families had lost their freedom for such a ridiculous reason. In that instant, Sally's worldview, which she had held onto for over 20 years, began to show signs of crumbling. She was beginning to doubt whether the powerful elven race was what most elves wanted. For elves, the last thing they need is stability. Nature is our home, and if we lose our freedom, we will lose our souls. Blower looked at Sally with a serious expression as he said, "If you want me to help you stay in Chaos City, then you have to promise me something. In the future, regardless of whether you become the leader of the Brewster family or the Elven Queen, you will strive for true freedom for all elves, not safety and stability." Sally pursed her lips as she looked at Blower, but she still didn't say anything. "I'll be coming to Amy's again tomorrow night. I hope you can make your choice." Blower didn't try to rush her. He nodded and turned to leave. What is true freedom? Sally stood on the spot as the cold moonlight shone down upon her, elongating her shadow on the grass. She looked at her own shadow and fell into deep thought. "Father, can we go see the little stars?" In the restaurant, Amy had just taken a bath and changed into a set of bare pajamas. She was wide awake as she looked at Meg with her bright eyes. Sure. Meg was planning to lie down early to learn how to cook, but he couldn't help but nod at the sight of Amy's adorable expression. Yay. Let's go see the stars, Ugly Duckling. Amy picked up Ugly Duckling in her arms and ran toward the balcony on the 3rd floor. Meg turned on the staircase light with a smile and followed Amy up the stairs. The moon is so round and beautiful today. It's like a big pancake. I really want to take a bite out of it. Amy looked up at the moon in the sky as soon as they stepped out. Meg also looked up at the moon in the sky, which was about to become a perfect circle. Upon hearing Amy's words, he was suddenly struck by a sense of nostalgia for the Mid-Autumn Festival. Those days of eating mooncakes while admiring the full moon were truly gone. Father, can the moon be eaten? Amy turned to Meg with curiosity and anticipation on her little face. Chapter 501. What? Hank lost? He lost to the disciple of Crassus and Julian? In the conference room on the top floor of the Magus Tower, Brent abruptly rose to his feet with incredulity in his eyes. All of the elders of the Magus Tower sitting in the conference room were also astonished. If George had lost, they would have been able to accept it. After all, George was only 12 years old and a novice magic caster, so it was normal for him to lack battle experience. However, Hank was Brent's favorite disciple. He was only 16 years old, but he was already at the 4th tier. Among the younger generation of the Magus Tower, he was already considered to be an exceptional prodigy. However, he had led the team to Chaos School, thinking that he was going to win for sure. Who would have thought that he would be defeated by the disciple of Crassus and Julian? One had to realize that the little half-elf girl was only 4.5 years old, and she had only become the disciple of Julian and Crassus a month ago. Just how freakishly talented was she to be able to defeat Hank in less than a month? Richard's expression had also darkened slightly upon hearing this. A ball of dark green flames erupted from the letter in his hand, incinerating it into ashes. He turned to Brent and said, "Not only did Hank lose to that little girl, he even used the forbidden spell that you gave him to launch a sneak attack on her after losing to her." What? All of the elders immediately erupted into a frenzy. Launching a sneak attack during a duel was a very shameless thing to do. Furthermore, he had launched a sneak attack on a 4.5-year-old little girl during a duel. That was a disgrace to the Magus Tower. So, she's dead? Brent faltered momentarily before turning to Richard with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. Do you think a little 4th-tier brat like her would be able to successfully launch a sneak attack on Crassus and Novan? Richard looked at Brent with a hint of mockery on his face as he said, "Furthermore, that idiot's sneak attack was countered by that little girl herself. How is that possible? The forbidden spell I gave him was at least as powerful as a 7th-tier spell. How was she able to block it?" Brent's eyes widened. All of the elders were even more shocked upon hearing this. There were 2 10th-tier magic casters present, and Novan, the #1 spatial magic caster on the continent, so the sneak attack of a 4th-tier magic caster was indeed a little laughable. However, they didn't think that the one who stopped the sneak attack would be the little girl herself. Richard's brows furrowed, and he said, "Urian installed the prophecy stone on her staff. That fireball should have amplified the power of her attack by more than tenfold, so she was able to defeat Hank on her own. That idiot. When he comes back, I'll teach him a lesson." A blush appeared on Brent's face as he gritted his teeth. It was one thing for him to launch a sneak attack on a 4-year-old little girl, but even that sneak attack had failed. This was a complete disgrace to him, and he was going to teach this brat a lesson when he came back. He's already been crippled by Crassus and has become a complete cripple. He left the team after leaving Chaos City and won't be returning to the Magus Tower. Richard shook his head with a hint of regret on his face. With George's talent, he would at least be able to become an 8th-tier magic caster and become a mainstay of the Magus Tower. How can Crassus be so cruel? Great Elder, you have to redress my grievances. Hank is my last disciple, and also my most talented disciple. I wanted him to inherit my mantle, but now he's been crippled by Crassus. Brent's expression changed as he turned to Richard with a hint of grief in his voice. All of the elders wore different expressions on their faces, but no one said anything. Heh, your disciple launched a sneak attack on his 4-year-old disciple, and he even used a forbidden spell. He was clearly trying to kill her, but in the end, the little girl took the brunt of the attack herself. No matter where you go, you have to pay the price for your actions. This is the most basic moral code of all magic casters. At the end of the round table, a tall and thin old man looked at Brent with a hint of mockery on his face as he said, "What's funny is that you still think your disciple is innocent and pitiful. I'm rather surprised that Crassus only crippled his brain. If this were 30 years ago, even if he was a disciple of the Magus Tower, he would have been killed with a fireball magic spell. Hank's actions have crossed the bottom line of all magic casters. I also think that Crassus' punishment is justified." An elder nodded in agreement. If this kind of culture spreads throughout the Magus Tower, no one will want to work hard to improve themselves in the future. Instead, they'll want to get their hands on more forbidden spells so that they can kill their enemies when they're no match for them. Another elder chuckled coldly. Brent was about to retort, but he hesitated momentarily before swallowing his words. Instead, he turned to Richard and awaited his decision. Remove Hank from the Magus Tower and inform all of the disciples of the Magus Tower about this. I'll write a letter to Crassus in person to explain the situation to him. Richard turned to Brent with a grave expression as he said, "Also, Crassus has already said something to you. Come to Chaos City and apologize to him in person within 10 days. Otherwise, he'll come to Rodu to tear down the Magus Tower in person." Wah! Brent's expression changed drastically upon hearing this, and he was completely dumbstruck. All of the elders were also in an uproar as they discussed among themselves. Some of them were enraged, while others were concerned. Crassus tearing down the Magus Tower was no laughing matter. This had happened more than once in the history of the Magus Tower, and he had made an indelible contribution to the Magus Tower's current scale. Great elder, this? Brent turned to Richard with a hint of panic in his eyes. "I'll leave this matter to you." Richard's voice was cold, and he had no intention of speaking up for him. "Great elder." Right at this moment, an urgent voice sounded from outside the conference room. Richard's brows furrowed slightly as he made his way toward the door. The door of the conference room was slowly opened, and a middle-aged magic caster strode forward before handing a letter to Richard. At the same time, he lowered his voice and said, "Great elder, this is an urgent letter from the Wind Forest." Richard accepted the letter, and the envelope was reduced to ashes in his hands. The remaining piece of paper fell into his hands, and his brows were tightly furrowed after just a few glances. He closed the letter and turned around as he said, "Today's meeting is adjourned. Brent, Elliot, you guys stay behind. Everyone else can go back first." A glimmer of hope appeared in Brent's eyes again. All of the elders departed, and there were only 8 people left in the conference room. Richard waved a hand, and the soundproof magic formation in the conference room was activated. A faint golden light barrier enshrouded the entire conference room. "Great Elder, is there something you want us to stay for?" Elliot asked. Everyone else was also looking at Richard with curious expressions, wondering if Richard was preparing to face the threat from the Crassus. Brent's mouth twitched, but he refrained from saying anything in the end. He looked at Richard with a hopeful expression. He didn't want to face the Crassus on his own. Chapter 502. The conference room fell into a deathly silence, and all of the elders' expressions darkened as they stared at the letter. There was no signature on the letter, but none of them doubted its authenticity. After all, no one knew just how close the elven race was to the Magus Tower. Schubert is the elven minister in charge of punishment, right? He holds an extremely high status in the elven race. Even if Irina really is insane, there's no way she would kill him, right? Brent swallowed with incredulity in his voice. Elliot and the others were also looking at Richard in silence. All of them had participated in the ambush 3 years ago, and they had either directly or indirectly crippled Meg Alex. Schubert was one of the people sent by the elven race at the time, and he was the one who had brought that 1-year-old half-elf girl with him. Now that he had been killed by Irina, all of them were extremely concerned. Just how powerful was Irina? They had personally witnessed Meg Alex's terrifying power 3 years ago, so they had a better idea of just how powerful she was. It was said that they were the most powerful beings in the younger generation. If she were to seek revenge for Meg Alex and their little daughter, what kind of fate would await them? Perhaps Schubert was only the beginning. Irina doesn't follow common sense. If she really did know that Schubert was involved in the ambush 3 years ago, then it wouldn't be strange for her to kill him. Richard looked at everyone and said in a low voice, "Furthermore, this may only be a warning and the beginning. Even though the royal family has already suppressed this matter, and all the evidence from back then has been taken care of, we still can't be sure how much information she has gathered. Perhaps that elf who returned brought more information than we expected. Then what should we do? If she finds out that we were involved in the ambush 3 years ago, will she come after us as well?" Brent was a little nervous. Crassus' request was still stuck in his throat, and now he had to face Irina's threat of revenge, and he felt as if he were about to have a mental breakdown. We're the only ones who know about this. Those demons have already been killed, and the second prince definitely won't reveal this to anyone else. Even if she knows that our Magus Tower is involved in this, she won't make us her enemy, right? The royal family definitely won't allow her to kill a magic caster from our Magus Tower without any evidence. If she doesn't want to incite a war between the Elven race and the Roth Empire, then she wouldn't have come to Rodu on her own, right? Otherwise, we could kill her in Rodu just like we did 3 years ago. No matter how powerful Alex is, he would still be crippled by us. Elliot was very confident in his voice. That's right. If she dares to come, we'd her. She gave birth to that bastard child with Alex 3 years ago, and we're still covering up that scandal for her. If news of this spreads back to the Elven race, and the elves learn that the pristine Elven princess in their hearts has actually given birth to a half-elf bastard with a human, they definitely won't support her anymore. As long as she's stripped of her status as the Elven princess, she'll be nothing more than an ordinary person no matter how arrogant she is. We can kill her, and the Elven race won't be able to do anything about it. Brent's breathing was accelerating. The other elders' eyes also lit up upon hearing this. They had crippled Alex 3 years ago, and the biggest threat was Irina. If they could kill Irina as well, then all of this would be resolved. Furthermore, hasn't the Crassus already severed ties with the Magus Tower? If he wants to destroy the Magus Tower again, then we can kill him as well. He's just an outsider. We have enough reason and confidence to kill him if he wants to destroy the Magus Tower. Brent's expression was already tinged with a hint of madness. Well, all of the elders were rather hesitant upon hearing this, and all of them turned to Richard. "Idiot. Looks like there's a reason why Hank would do something as stupid as that." Richard's brows furrowed as he looked at Brent and said in a cold voice, "If you dare to spread the news that Irina gave birth to a child, then the entire continent will know that our Magus Tower colluded with the demons to kill Alex tomorrow. When that time comes, are you planning to commit suicide to face the onslaught of the Empire's heavy cavalry?" The reason why they dared to let us know that Irina gave birth to a child was because they had information that could be used against us. Are you planning to fight them to the death? I. Brent's expression changed drastically, and he lowered his head, not daring to say anything. And Crassus, even though he said that he severed ties with the Magus Tower, if he really does come to destroy the Magus Tower, how many people in the Magus Tower do you think will support you in killing him? Richard's voice became even colder as he said, "Let me tell you, at least half of the people in the Magus Tower will kill you first as they're all his disciples. Furthermore, if you dare to attack him, that person in the royal palace definitely won't just stand by and do nothing. They're the only two people left who built the Magus Tower." Brent's face became paler and paler, and his legs began to tremble at the mention of that person in the royal palace. He lowered his head even further and didn't dare to say anything. Elliot also lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. "Great Elder, what should we do now? We can't just sit here and wait for our deaths, right?" A short and fat elder hesitated momentarily before mustering up his courage. "Don't worry too much. Irina still has to be confined for a year, and there's no way that she would have a detailed list of all of the people involved in the operation 3 years ago, so she won't be able to come after you. Furthermore, our Magus Tower is not to be trifled with. If she really dares to come to Rodu, then let her come. This is our territory, so what's there to panic about? Richard glanced at the letter that was still hovering in midair. The letter was instantly reduced to ashes, and he said in a cold voice, I'll send people to keep an eye on Irina. From now on, cut off all contact between her and the outside world. As long as she can't find any concrete evidence, then she won't come to Rodu. At the same time, I'll put pressure on the Elven race to keep her in check. I'm sure they don't want to see a situation where both sides suffer. Great Elder, Brent opened his mouth to say something. Richard looked up at him with an indifferent expression and said, If I were you, I would be thinking about how to get a flying steed as soon as possible so that I can get to Chaos City. Yes. Brent swallowed the rest of his words and lowered his head again, not daring to say anything. Bastard. Looks like that elf has discovered a lot more than we expected. We shouldn't have let him go back alive. Chapter 503. The green letter was reduced to a ball of green flames, and the fierce winds abruptly subsided. The ferocious look on Joshua's face also gradually faded, and he reverted back to his usual gentle self. He reached out with his long fingers and caught a piece of white paper, upon which it plummeted to the ground as if it had been struck by an immensely heavy force. Schubert is dead, so it looks like Irina already knows about what happened in the past. With her intelligence, she'll definitely connect the dots to me, and that will be a fatal blow to our relationship. I have to find Alex and that little brat before she does, then kill them. Only then will she completely give up on me, and when that time comes, Irina, I'll make you marry me willingly. Joshua stood in front of his desk, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he picked up a quill beside him and began to write a letter. Dear Irina. Half an hour later, Joshua gently waved his hand to dry the ink on the paper. He then carefully read through the letter, which had been rewritten 3 times, and only after making sure that the tone was sincere enough and that the wording was just right did he fold the letter with a pleased expression before placing it into an envelope on his desk. Seeing as you want to know about them, I'll tell you that they're still alive. That way, you won't be in a hurry to exact your revenge, right? Thinking back on what I didn't do back then, I really do regret it. Green light was emanating from Joshua's finger, and he gently smeared it over the envelope. A series of complex runes appeared on the envelope, sealing it shut. Joshua snapped his fingers, and the tightly shut door of his study was opened. The butler standing at the door bowed slightly with a small bamboo tube in his hand. News from Seuss? Joshua glanced at the bamboo tube in the butler's hand with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Yes, Your Highness. It was a messenger eagle that just arrived. The butler replied in a respectful manner. Give it to me. Joshua waved a hand at him with a calm expression, and as he accepted the bamboo tube, he handed the letter to the butler as he said, Send this letter to the princess in the Wind Forest as soon as possible. Yes. The butler took the envelope with both hands, turned around and left quickly, quietly closing the door behind him. Josh opened the bamboo tube in his hand and poured out a piece of paper. After looking at it for a while, he murmured to himself with furrowed brows, Alex and his daughter might have appeared on the Demon Islands. Seuss has already been in Chaos City for over 10 days, but he hasn't found anything related to Alex. Could it be that my previous judgment was wrong? They're not in Chaos City at all. Instead, they chose a deserted place to hide? This time around, Joshua pondered for a longer period of time. Then, he walked over to the table and wrote 2 letters before placing them into a bamboo tube and an envelope. After opening the door, the butler was still standing respectfully at the door. Send this eagle letter to Seuss, and this one to Helena. Josh handed the 2 letters to the butler and said in a slightly grim voice, Also, keep a close eye on any elves from the Wind Forest that appear in Rodu next time. If any of them are behaving strangely, arrest them and interrogate them. I'd rather kill the wrong person than let them go. Yes. The butler lowered his head in a respectful manner before quickly departing. Alex, you're still as unpredictable as ever. However, I'm going to hunt you down and kill you even if you have to hide to the ends of the earth, Josh murmured to himself with a cold smile. Mistress, Irina killed Master Schubert. Are we just going to stand by and do nothing? Her Majesty has been indulging her in every possible way, yet she's only been confined for a year. Isn't that enough to disappoint all of the major families? Heidi was looking at Helena with an enraged expression in the cave above her. Then what do you want to do? Helena asked in an indifferent voice as she looked up at the most dazzling star in the sky. I think we should unite all of the major families and pressure His Majesty to revoke her status as the princess and her contract with the Tree of Life. Then, we should banish her from the Wind Forest. Heidi gritted her teeth. Banish her from the Wind Forest? Helena looked down at Heidi with a hint of mockery in her eyes as she said, Do you know that Irina's current powers are second only to His Majesty in the Elven race? Even I have no confidence in being able to defeat Irina, who is blessed by the Tree of Life. His Majesty is going to return to the Sea of Stars eventually, and when that time comes, Princess Irina will become the most powerful guardian of our elven race, yet you want to banish her? But she's too arrogant and unruly to be controlled by you, mistress. If you support someone else to become the princess and become the new successor to the queen, the entire elven race will be under your control when Her Majesty returns to the Sea of Stars, Heidi said in an urgent manner. Why would I want to control the elven race? I want the elven race to become more powerful. I want the elven race to be able to avenge the humiliation of almost being wiped out during the war among species. I want the entire continent to feel fear before the arrows of the elven warriors. Helena's expression was rather cold as she looked at Heidi and said, Hints, you can die, but Irina can't die. Her reputation can't be tarnished in the slightest, as she will become the most powerful deterrent to the elven race. Besides, how do you know that the queen will return to the Sea of Stars before me? You have to realize that I watched the queen grow up, so I'll be the one to return to the Sea of Stars first. Helena's expression gradually calmed down, but her eyes gradually lit up with a deranged light as she said, Power means nothing to me. My only wish is to see the elven race stand at the pinnacle of all races on the Norland continent. For that, I'll do whatever it takes. All of the stars in the starry sky suddenly erupted with scintillating light as if they were burning. A vast expanse of light fell upon Helena's body, as if a veil of light had been draped over her body. Heidi looked up at Helena with feverish tears shimmering in her eyes. Helena withdrew her gaze, and the starlight also faded as she looked down at Heidi with a calm expression and asked, How many of our brethren have returned this month? Mistress, a total of 204 of our brethren have returned this month. 36 of them returned of their own accord, while the others were all sent back. Most of them aren't very powerful. Only 20 of them are at or above the 4th tier, and they've all been assigned to the Guardian Squad and the major families, Heidi hurriedly replied. That's still too few and far too weak. Helena's brows furrowed as she contemplated the situation momentarily and said, Increase the commission for capturing high-rank elves. We want our brethren who can directly enhance the power of the Guardian Squad, not those who can only do menial tasks. Tell those stupid demons that if they continue to treat us like this, we'll cancel this partnership. Yes, Heidi nodded before quickly exiting the cave. Chapter 504. Your Highness, you've been confined for a year again. What are you going to do? Under the Tree of Life, Phyrus was looking at Irina with a concerned expression. Snare was also standing off to the side with a concerned look on his face. He didn't think that the princess would be so decisive as to kill Schubert right after learning that he was involved in that incident. However, this should be enough to intimidate all of the people involved in that incident. Isn't confinement a common occurrence? What's there to worry about? I was also confined when I left the Wind Forest. If I want to leave, who can stop me? Irina said with a nonchalant expression. She pinched Phyrus' nose with a smile and said, You don't have to worry about that, Phyrus. You don't have enough brains anyway. Phyrus looked at Irina, and her mouth gaped open, only to find that she had no response to that. She had also been involved in the incident when Irina had left the wind forest. Even though she was only responsible for keeping a lookout, one thing was for sure. After receiving the protection of the Tree of Life, no one would be able to stop the princess from leaving the wind forest. Irina turned to Snare and said, "Snare, I have a few things for you." Snare lowered his head in a respectful manner and said, "Your Highness, please give me your instructions. I'll have to trouble you to find Alex and my daughter." According to Alex's personality, there's no way that he would stay in Rodu or the Roth Empire after what happened. It's most likely that he's gone to the Demon Islands, Dragon Island, or Chaos City. We've been to those three places many times, so we're quite familiar with them. I'll write down a few locations for you to search. Perhaps you'll find something. Also, I'll write you a few letters for you to deliver to some of my friends so that they can provide you with some assistance. However, after what happened to Josh, I'm not sure if some of them are trustworthy, so it's best not to tell them about Alex," Irina said. "I'll be sure to keep this a secret." Snare nodded with a serious expression. Irina nodded. After a brief moment of contemplation, she said, "After Schubert's death, Rodu will definitely receive news of it very quickly, and you'll be on their hit list. Hence, before this matter is resolved, don't set foot in the Roth Empire again. Also, from the moment you leave the Wind Forest, you have to conceal your whereabouts. There are most likely people in our race who won't let you off the hook." "All right, I'm best at tracking and hiding." Snare nodded in a confident manner. After a brief hesitation, he turned to Irina and asked, "Your Highness, aside from avenging Master Alex and young mistress, you killed Schubert today to get His Majesty to abolish slavery in the Elven law. Are you trying to abolish the family system?" "But the family system is already deeply rooted in the Elven race. If we want to abolish it, we will have to become enemies with all the other families." Phyllis was slightly shocked when she heard this, and she looked at Irina. "That's right. I want to abolish the family system and return freedom to all elves." Irina nodded with a grim expression as she said, "So what if it's deeply rooted? We can just uproot it altogether. Freedom is the soul of all elves, and Helena and those so-called families are destroying the souls of all elves. As such, resistance like today will only continue to increase. Becoming enemies with all of the other families isn't scary, as there will be more ordinary elves standing on my side. What I need now is time. A year of confinement is just right." Phyllis and Snare's eyes both lit up upon hearing this. "All right, you two can go now. I'll give you the letter tomorrow." Irina nodded with a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. Snare and Phyllis nodded before departing from the cave. Irina sat under the tree and looked up. The branches of the Tree of Life parted, and the cold moonlight shone down upon her through the hole in the ceiling. A bright moon just so happened to appear above the hole. "Alex, milady, where are you two? When will I be able to see you again?" Irina murmured to herself, and the only response she could hear was the gentle swaying of the Tree of Life's branches. "Amy, do you want to eat the moon?" Meg asked with a smile as he looked at Amy. I think the moon is round and white, and it looks really delicious. I really want to take a bite." Amy nodded with anticipation in her eyes, and she even swallowed her saliva as she spoke. A smile appeared on Meg's face. As expected, this little glutton would always think of food whenever she saw something. However, he had also had similar thoughts when he was a child, so he had always looked forward to the annual Mid-Autumn Festival, as he was able to eat delicious mooncakes during the festival. At the time, he had naively believed that mooncakes really were made from the moon, and that was why they were so delicious. A large mooncake had been cut into small triangular pieces, and each piece was extremely precious. "It's not easy to pick the moon, but if you want to eat it, I'll try my best to make it into mooncakes for you, all right?" Meg looked at Amy with a smile. "Mooncakes made from the moon? That's great. That's great. I want to eat mooncakes made from the moon. Then when can Xiaomi eat it?" Amy's eyes lit up as she clapped her little hands with elation. Ugly Duckling was squeezed out of shape in her arms as she looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. Meg shook his head and said, "You'll have to wait for another 2 or 3 days. The moon isn't at its roundest yet, so it's not the best time to pick it. Wait until it's as round as a white jade plate. Then pick it and make it into mooncakes for you to share with your friends." Mooncakes like that are the most delicious. Oh, so that's how it is. Then it must be super delicious. Amy nodded with a thoughtful expression before turning to Meg with a curious expression and asking, Father, why do you know how to make mooncakes? Because in my father's hometown, there's a festival called the Mid-Autumn Festival every year at this time. Every year, relatives and friends will gather together, share delicious mooncakes, and admire the moon together. It's a day of reunion, Meg explained with a smile. Even though he had quickly accepted this world, he still couldn't help but think of his parents during the Mid-Autumn Festival. He reminisced about his childhood memories of eating mooncakes in his mother's arms under an osmanthus tree, and he still felt a sense of nostalgia. Chapter 505. Under the starry sky, Amy was holding Ugly Duckling in her arms as she looked up at Meg. Her eyes were filled with longing and hope, as well as a hint of nervousness. Seeing the longing in Amy's eyes, Meg felt as if his heart had been viciously stabbed by a sharp knife. He thought that he had already done his best, but Amy was still curious and longed for her mother. Just like last time when she was sleep-talking, this longing couldn't be hidden. Meg didn't know what Amy's concept of a mother was, as he had also been avoiding this question this entire time. He didn't want Amy to realize that she was missing her mother too early, and he didn't want her to be troubled and sad because of this. However, it appeared that she had already realized this long ago. It was just that she was too mature, and knew how to hide her thoughts so as not to make things difficult for him. Her maturity made Meg's heart ache, and at the same time, he was deeply remorseful. Even though he wasn't the one who had caused her mother to be missing, avoiding this question was clearly not something a qualified father should do. Meg squatted down and looked into Amy's eyes with a serious expression as he said, Amy's mother is currently living on the moon, but father's power isn't enough, so he can't bring her down to reunite with us. When the day comes when father's cooking can become a long staircase that extends all the way to the moon, we'll be able to bring her back and reunite with our family. Really? Mother really lives on the moon? Amy's eyes immediately lit up as she looked up at the moon in the sky. However, she soon pursed her little lips with a concerned expression as she said, but the moon is so far away, and it looks so bare. Mother must be very lonely up there by herself, right? Also, she must be cold and hungry, so she must miss us very much. Don't worry, your mother is also super powerful. She won't be lonely if she's watching us from up there. She'll be obedient and wait for us to save her. Meg gently hugged Amy and whispered in her ear, Don't worry, you'll be able to see your mother very soon. Don't worry, Amy, I'll definitely let you see your mother as soon as possible. Meg made up his mind. Leveling up twice in a month wasn't slow, but it seemed like he needed to speed it up. Yes, I believe in Lord Father. Because Lord Father is the most powerful, Lord Mother must also be super powerful. Amy nodded with a smile on her little face. She looked at Meg and asked expectantly, But, Father, what does Mother look like? Xiaomi is so curious. Your mother is the most beautiful woman in the world. Just like Amy, she has long silver hair and blue eyes. She is very gentle and can sing many beautiful songs. She can also dance beautifully, Meg said with a smile. In fact, he also did not have a specific image of Irina in his mind. All the memories related to her were missing, so he could only extrapolate her appearance from Amy. The most beautiful woman in the world? Amy's eyes were sparkling, and she wrapped her arms around Meg's neck with elation. Lord Father, you're so awesome to be able to marry a woman as beautiful as Lord Mother. Of course. Who do you think is the most handsome man in the world? Meg asked with a smile. Of course it's Lord Father, Amy replied without any hesitation. Meg was elated to hear this. She really was a straightforward little girl. But Lord Father, you said that the Mid-Autumn Festival is coming up in a few days, and we're going to eat mooncakes and share them with our friends. Are we going to invite our friends to the party like last time? Amy asked with a curious expression. It's going to be a little different this time. Perhaps we're going to share the mooncakes with all of our guests to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival. Meg shook his head with a smile. After some thought, he said, "But I don't know the specifics as the mooncakes haven't been made yet." Meg still had to discuss the mooncakes with the system first. If the system didn't provide him with the recipe and tools, then it would be a little troublesome, so he couldn't be too sure of himself. Is that so? Then it's going to be super lively. Mother will be very happy to see us eating mooncakes from the moon, right? Amy nodded as she looked at Meg. Yes, I think so. Meg nodded with a smile. He was suddenly a little curious about what the fairy princess in the cave in the wind forest was thinking about. Did she miss Amy as well? Good night, Mother. After playing on the balcony for a while, Meg carried Amy downstairs to bed. Before entering the room, Amy raised her head and waved at the moon in the sky. She then snuggled into Meg's arms with a sweet smile on her face. What an easily satisfied little girl. Meg held Amy gently in his arms. Even though he had lied to her, he was definitely going to keep his promise. No matter how long the stairway to heaven was or how treacherous the path was, he was going to make sure that Amy would meet her birth mother and give them a stable life. As soon as he reached the second floor, the two little ones in his arms had already fallen asleep. Meg looked at the sweet smile on Amy's face as if she were dreaming, and he couldn't bear to wake her up. As such, he gently removed her shoes and placed her and Ugly Duckling onto the little bed before covering them with a blanket. Amy held Ugly Duckling in her arms in a very natural manner and rested her chin gently on its head. The smile on her face became even more contented as she murmured, "Mother, you're so beautiful. What an adorable little girl." Meg stood beside the bed and looked at Amy for a long while before a smile appeared on his face. He bent over and kissed the hair on her forehead before picking up his pajamas and making his way to the bathroom. At the same time, he checked the reward he had received for upgrading the restaurant yesterday. Beer and kebabs were both Meg's favorite things. On a summer night, there was no better pairing than a large glass of cold beer with an unlimited supply of kebabs. He first opened the beer brewing experience bag, upon which a stream of information flowed into his mind. It's that simple? Mag was just about to be taught a complicated beer brewing method, but he faltered slightly upon hearing that. This so-called beer brewing method was even simpler than ice cream. A fully functional beer brewing machine would solve all of his problems. All Mag had to do was to pour the ingredients into the machine according to the correct ratio, then turn on the switch and wait for a barrel of beer to be brewed. Chapter 506. Meg raised an eyebrow as he listened to the system's self-praise. "My system, you're really something. Using aviation technology to brew beer is like using an aviation missile to kill a mosquito." Host, please don't insult the ingenuity of a system. The system said solemnly. Good, good, good. Meg rolled his eyes and asked curiously, "But brewing beer is so simple. Can I use the test space for the god of cookery once?" Although the method of brewing beer is simple, the proportion of malt, hops, yeast, and other ingredients needed to be controlled by the host. This can train the host control. Furthermore, there are methods to store and use the beer in the later stages. If you want to brew the most perfect beer, the host will have to put in a lot of effort. Therefore, the host can use the test space for the god of cookery once, the system replied. Meg thought for a moment and nodded. Brewing beer in the kitchen is a waste of space. Although your beer brewing machine is a miniature version, it's still about the size of a refrigerator. Why don't you put it in the spare room on the third floor and use it as a wine cellar in the future? All right. Does the host want to enter the test space for the god of cookery now? The system asked. I'll take a look at the experience bag for the beef kebab first before deciding if I want to finish them tonight, Meg said inwardly. Then, he opened another shiny experience bag with his consciousness. All of the experience and techniques related to the beef kebab surged into his mind. Meg, who was already used to the simple method of brewing beer, was completely unprepared for the sudden influx of information. His brain was a little dazed, and it took him a few minutes to recover. Holy fuck. A small beef kebab is actually so complicated? I feel like this is the biggest challenge I've ever faced, Meg mumbled in surprise as he shook his head. This small beef kebab, from the mixing of the sauce to the marinating of the beef, to the kebab, to the flipping of the beef, to the control of the fire, to the control of the fire, to the timing of the seasonings, and so on. All of these required very strict standards. In order to make a perfect kebab, a chef had to be very skilled in the art of roasting meat. He had to have perfect control over every step of the process. This was obviously not something that could be done by a roadside stall. Meg thought for a while and rejected the idea of learning 2 dishes in one go. Let's first brew today. I'll use the rest of the time to consolidate the increase in my realm brought by yesterday's level up. I'll practice my sword art to the extreme and learn how to roast beef kebabs tomorrow. Roasting beef kebabs was a completely new challenge for him. Very few of the cooking experiences he had learned in the past could be applied here. He had no idea how long it would take for him to succeed. Furthermore, the number of times he had eaten kebabs in his previous life was so many that even he couldn't count them all. Who knew what kind of perverted requests he would have made back then? If he were to be trapped in the god of cookery's dimension for an entire night, he would have wasted an opportunity to use the god of cookery's dimension. After taking a quick shower, Meg changed into his pajamas and walked over to Amy's bed. He looked at the little girl sleeping soundly, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He returned to his bed and covered himself with the blanket. Then, he closed his eyes and used his divine sense to push open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. A white light flashed, and Meg found himself in a small room. This time, he wasn't in the kitchen. Instead, he was in the empty room on the 3rd floor. On the left side of the room, there was a silver-colored metal apparatus that was about the height of a person. All kinds of metal pipes and tubes were connected together. It looked extremely high-end and metallic. Beside the beer brewer were several wooden barrels filled with malt, hops, and yeast. Next to the brewer were several wooden barrels, which were probably used to store the brewed beer. Although a sparrow is small, it has all the essentials. Using this kind of technology to build a beer brewer is simply a waste of resources. Meg stepped forward to inspect the aircraft-grade beer brewer. As a mechanical lackey, he was quite knowledgeable in this field. Furthermore, he had visited the Oettinger brewery in Germany many years ago, so he had a certain level of understanding of the craft of beer. System: is this beer as good as the beer brewed by the Oettinger brewery? Meg asked internally. The Oettinger brewery was the leading brewer in Germany, and its status was similar to that of the Tsingtao beer in China. It wasn't very high-end, but there were a few beers that were quite to Meg's liking. Meg wasn't used to premium brews like Budweiser and Carlsberg. Instead, he preferred the snow beer and Tsingtao beer. A few ice cubes were thrown into a large glass, and they were cold and crisp. Please don't compare the beer brewed by the system to those low-end beers. The system's aircraft-grade brewing technology ensures that all of the brewing processes are of the highest quality. Aside from the brewing technology, the system has also selected and cultivated all types of ingredients on the Norland continent. The barley grown on the Yellow Plains to the northwest of the Twilight Forest receives over 16 hours of sunlight every day, and the barley has accumulated an unparalleled amount of sugar. The barley with the most plump barley grains and sufficient sugar was selected to be cultivated into malt. The hops grown in the Maro River Basin have undergone several generations of cultivation, and they combine the superior characteristics of many different types of hops in the world. They have an outstanding aroma and rich foam, making them the best of the best. The yeast was also selected from many different types of yeast, and the optimal yeast was selected through the elimination of inferior genetic sequences. This can effectively reduce the fermentation time of the beer and, at the same time, enhance the taste of the beer. The system introduced its research results with a smug look on its face. All that was missing was a "Why aren't you praising me yet?" Sounds good. Meg nodded. That's it? The system was a little incredulous. The system was unwilling to give up, and it continued. Such an advanced beer brewer, such high-end ingredients, and such painstaking cultivation. It's not bad. Meg nodded with a serious expression. Would it kill you to praise me? The system spent so much time and effort to do so much research just so you could brew a cup of top-grade beer, and you're saying it's not bad? The system's roaring voice sounded. Then, oh, it's not bad. Meg nodded with a smile. Oh, fuck you. The system's enraged voice sounded, and a stampeding emoji appeared in Meg's mind. Meg did his best to repress his laughter. As expected, teasing the system was one of his daily pastimes, and it was simply too delightful. "System, you're charging for these ingredients, right?" Meg asked calmly in his mind. "Of course." The system replied with an enraged expression. It seemed that it was still very angry at being ignored. Chapter 507. After teasing the system, the smile on Meg's face faded as a serious expression appeared on his face. He began to weigh the ingredients according to the brewing experience in his mind before placing them into the various openings of the brewing machine in an orderly manner. One of the most obvious changes that had occurred to Meg during this period of cooking was that it was easier for him to focus. No matter what time it was, he would be able to quickly adjust himself to the best of his ability as soon as he began to cook. This was one of the essential skills of a top-notch chef. After confirming all of the ingredients, Meg pressed the start button on the machine. The machine operated almost soundlessly, and the only thing that could be seen was a small red light flashing on the machine. Otherwise, one would think that the machine wasn't moving at all. As expected, aeronautical technology really is extraordinary. The system knows all of these things, so it can completely transform the world. Or rather, in some unknown corner of this world, the system is silently transforming the world for the sake of selling vegetables. Meg couldn't help but praise the system in his heart. The system's technology was at least several decades ahead of Earth's, and this gap was constantly widening. After absorbing all of Earth's technology, the system was able to integrate and develop on this foundation. This was an extremely terrifying potential. "I seem to sense that someone is praising the system." The system's voice sounded. "You're just imagining things," Meg replied calmly. The waiting time for brewing was infinitely compressed in the god of cookery's space, and the small red light quickly turned green. The brewing machine sounded, and Meg picked up a large beer barrel beside him before opening the valve. Clear and translucent beer flowed through a transparent metal pipe into the barrel, and the refreshing and rich aroma of beer instantly filled the entire room, making one feel as if they were intoxicated. Meg's eyes lit up as he praised. "The aroma is very unique. It's a little like raw snow, but it's a little more mellow and rich. There's also a hint of German wine aroma. Just the aroma alone is enough to make me want to have a glass. It really is the best beer there is." He had tasted everything from low-end beers that cost 3 to 5 yuan to premium brews that cost several hundred yuan. But this was the first time that he had encountered a beer that made him want to have a glass just by smelling its aroma. Part of the reason for this was the enhancement provided by the brewing process, but the main reason was that the system had optimized all of the brewing ingredients that had been planted on the Norland continent. As expected, the system had never disappointed him. "System, this kind of excellent quality beer should have reached the standard, right?" Meg asked in his heart. He was quite confident. Ding! The beer is not up to standard. There are minor problems with the ratio of various materials. You need to be more strict in the weighing. During the process of filling the barrel, you need to prevent the moisture and bacteria in the air from entering, so as to not affect the quality of the beer. The system's voice sounded. As expected, Meg raised his eyebrows, but did not argue with the system. Being rejected had already become a habit, and there was indeed room for improvement and improvement. In fact, it was not a bad thing. Meg gave up on the beer he brewed this time. He carefully weighed the ingredients and proportions to ensure that every single grain of malt was put into the machine. Then, he turned on the machine again. Again and again, the system was always able to pick out some minor problems, and then Meg would constantly make adjustments and modifications. Meg enjoyed the feeling of constantly improving himself through the repeated process. After all, he hadn't even spent a day practicing on the wall. Compared to the previous times when he had to cook with some difficulty, this kind of thing that only required him to be a little more serious was simply too easy. "System, what about this time?" Meg asked expectantly as he poured a cup of pale golden beer into a transparent crystal cup. Looking at the 2:1 ratio of beer to foam in the cup, He asked with anticipation. Ding. According to the requirements of the host's previous life one, the color is pale golden, clear, and transparent. There are no suspended particles. The aroma of the hop is elegant and not pungent. Achieved. 2. The foam is long and rich. The foam is strong. The foam can reach 1/3 of the cup. The color is pure white. It can be hung in the cup for more than 5 minutes. Achieved. 3. The taste is refreshing and mellow. The quality of the beer is cool. The body of the beer is harmonious and soft. It has a strong killing power. After entering the throat, there is no lingering aftertaste. The bitterness is delicate, weak, and slightly pleasant. There is no aftertaste. It makes one want to have another cup. Achieved. The 3 requirements have been met at the same time. The quality of this beer has reached the standard of the host's previous life. The quality has surpassed all the beers on earth. The system's voice sounded with a hint of pride. This is the beer I brewed. What are you so proud of? Meg took a deep breath of the fragrance of the beer and said with a smile, this is the raw material grown by the system. It is the female beer machine made by the system. You are just a brewer. Such high-quality beer can come to this world because of the system. So, shouldn't I feel proud? The system said proudly. This is the first time I've heard a vegetable seller say that the delicious food is all thanks to him. Meg curled his lips. Host, please don't use the title tea seller to insult the system. The system said angrily. Okay, ingredient supplier. Meg nodded his head. Well, the system is quite satisfied with this title. The system replied. Isn't it still a vegetable seller? Meg raised his eyebrows. No. A vegetable seller gives the impression of a roadside stall, but a supplier sounds much more classy. It suits the system's temperament very well. The system said seriously. But I always feel that a vegetable seller is easier to say. Meg muttered. Before the system said anything, he said directly, okay, I'm going to practice my sword now. System, change the scene. I want to rent a space. You are already despicable enough. The system also muttered. Before Meg could say anything, it said again, does the host want to drink this cup of beer? No. Beer makes people feel comfortable and immersed. It's not suitable for me to drink now. If I drink it later and cut myself, it wouldn't be good. Meg refused. A white light flashed and the scene of the small room changed into a spacious space. A long sword was stabbed into the ground. Meg stepped forward and pulled out the long sword. With the long sword in hand, he calmed himself down. Then, he suddenly stabbed forward, followed by an upward slash, and then a backward slash. The swordsmanship flowed smoothly. His steps were light and powerful. The swordsmanship was silent, but it gave people a feeling of unparalleled sharpness. Time flew by, but Meg was completely immersed in his sword practice. After his physical fitness had improved, he had unlocked 2 more sword techniques of the 13 shadow forms. The improvement of his physical fitness had also brought about an increase in his speed and strength. The explosive power was much stronger than before. The physical fitness of a 1st-tier knight, the swordsmanship of a 4th-tier knight, and the mind of a 10th-tier knight. What a strange combination. Meg stopped practicing his sword and took a break. Master, are we leaving Chaos City now? In the dark night, in a small courtyard, a black-robed man looked at Seuss, who was wrapped in a black robe, and asked softly. Chapter 508. We haven't received any orders from the higher-ups yet, but the news from Demon Island is quite urgent. If it really is Alex, then once he realizes that we're looking for him, he'll most likely disappear again. Seuss' voice was a little grim, and there was a hint of depression in his voice. The black-robed man hesitated momentarily before asking, but Master, the higher-ups say that Alex could be in Chaos City. Are we just going to give up on Chaos City? Our Black Falcons have already searched Chaos City for over 10 days. We've searched through all of the slums, but we haven't found a cripple with a half-elf girl. It's not that easy for a cripple to hide. We have so many spies in Chaos City, but we haven't found any leads. so there's a very high chance that he's not here. Seuss shook his head as he looked at the black-robed man with his dead fish eyes and said in a cold voice, "I've sparred with him before, and I know what kind of person he is. Even though he's a cripple, he definitely won't abandon his dignity as a knight. So there's no need to waste time on strange people. There's no way that he would become a chef. What we have to do is find him as soon as possible. Even a 10th-tier magic caster won't be able to recover from his crippled limbs." Yes. The black-robed man's expression changed as he lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything else. "Take a small team and continue to search Chaos City. The rest of you, come with me to Demon Island." Seuss swept his gaze over everyone present, and the scar between his eyebrows appeared particularly menacing on his pale face. What a beautiful morning. The next morning, the sky was just beginning to brighten, and Meg woke up from his bed. He tiptoed over to the sleeping Amy, and a smile appeared on his face as he changed his clothes, washed up, and went upstairs. After the system's enhancements, Meg's physical constitution had reached the standard of a first-tier knight. Even though his rank wasn't very high, his physical constitution was far superior to that of a normal person. He was almost comparable to a boxer in his past life, and his entire body was brimming with power. As expected, the system is very reliable to have recovered from a cripple to such a state. Meg stretched his arms and legs, and was very pleased with the strength he felt. In the beginning, his biggest concern was that he would have to live with a crippled body, but that concern had been completely erased. "System, can you give me a recipe for mooncakes?" Meg asked in his heart. At the same time, he pushed open the door to a small room on the 3rd floor. There was already a beer brewing machine, as well as all the ingredients and beer barrels that had been placed in the room the night before. "I can't." The system's reply. "I will give you the money." Mag tried again. "It's still not possible. This is the system's bottom line. Host, please don't use money to insult the system." "The system also has a bottom line," the system said sternly. Mag raised an eyebrow. The system had indeed never given in on recipes. It should have something to do with the so-called 3 laws of the system. "System, why haven't you issued any missions recently? Give me a mission. I don't feel good if I don't do missions for a day. Also, I don't want the reward for this mission to be too high level. I just want the method to make mooncakes." Mag contemplated the situation momentarily before replying with a serious expression. "The system does not have any missions to issue at the moment." The system rejected. "Then think of one now. Don't you have some conditions to trigger it? Tell me about it, and I'll trigger it for you." Meg was still unwilling to give up and continued, "Host, please do not force the system to issue a mission. This is a serious violation of the rules. You will make the system very passive." The system sternly protested. "How much is it for you to issue a mission? 100 gold coins? 1,000 gold coins? 10,000 gold coins?" Meg raised his eyebrows and asked, "That? 10,000 gold coins? This system?" The system hesitated. "I refuse. 10,000 gold coins? What a scam." Mag rolled his eyes and rejected him decisively. An ellipsis floated across the system. "Looks like I'll have to think long and hard about the mooncakes. The moon will be at its fullest in 3 days, and I have to make mooncakes at that time. Otherwise, the Mid-Autumn Festival celebration is going to be over," Mag thought to himself as he weighed all of the ingredients before pouring them into the brewing machine. The brewing time is 1 day. Even though it's not as fast as in the God of Cookery's space, compared to normal brewing methods, this is already a completely advanced technology. Meg pressed the start button, and the brewing process would be completed in 24 hours. He had to pour the beer into the barrels as soon as possible. It was extremely efficient to be able to brew 3 barrels of beer at once. After closing the door to the small room, Meg went downstairs to prepare the ingredients for the morning service. When it was about time, he went upstairs to wake Amy up. Just as Meg made his way over to the bed, Amy immediately opened her eyes. She looked at Meg with an elated expression and said, "Father, I dreamed of Mother last night. She was sitting under a glowing tree, and she was super beautiful and very gentle. She was holding Amy in her arms and singing to Amy." "Is that so? Did she say anything to our Xiaomi?" Meg smiled as he stroked Amy's hair. It seemed that she had been awake for a while and was deliberately waiting for him to wake her up. Yes, she said that she also wants to eat mooncakes. She lives on the moon, so she also wants to eat the moon. Father, after we make the mooncakes, let's eat them for Mother to see, Amy said earnestly as she looked at Meg. Okay, then when we're done, we'll eat them for her to see. Meg looked at Amy with a pained expression, and he stroked her hair as he said, Okay, then let's get up first. We'll go to class after breakfast. Okay. Amy happily hugged Meg's neck as she climbed up and kissed him on the cheek. After breakfast, Meg took Amy to school. When he returned, Yabamiya and Sally were already waiting for him at the entrance of the restaurant. Sally seemed to have something on her mind, and she was also a little tired, as if she hadn't had a good rest. Meg looked at Sally and hesitated momentarily, but didn't ask her anything in the end. He didn't know what had happened between Sally and Blower the night before, but if she didn't want to talk about it, then he didn't want to pry. Everyone had their own secrets, after all. Yabamiya was clearly also a little concerned about Sally, but she refrained from asking any questions. After a busy morning, Meg heaved a sigh of relief as he flipped over the sign at the entrance of the restaurant. Sally and Yabamiya also quickly cleaned up the cafeteria and finished their work for the morning. Sally looked at Meg and hesitated for a long while before asking, Boss, can I ask you a question? Chapter 509. Sally's emotions gradually calmed down as she looked into Meg's eyes. She hesitated momentarily before asking, What do you think is true freedom? Meg looked at Sally and thought for a moment before nodding. The freedom, I think, is the right to choose. No matter what other people think, as long as it's my own choice, I think that's the freedom I want. The right to choose? A contemplative look appeared on Sally's face. She thought back to the elves who were doing heavy work in the major families. They had no choice when they were assigned or even captured by the major families. They also had no choice when the nobles made them work. They didn't even have the right to choose whether they wanted to leave or stay. So they're not free. Sally's heart sank even further. She had already thought of this answer the night before, but she just didn't want to admit it. Sally was silent for a moment before turning to Meg. Which is more important between safety and freedom? Meg thought for a moment before replying, I think this question should be asked to those who choose. Different people will have different answers. Some people are willing to give up a certain amount of freedom for safety, but there are also people who would rather be in danger than be restricted. There are two choices, and those who can make their own choices are free. In this world, there were always some people who liked the feeling of death accompanying them like the wind. Sally nodded with a thoughtful expression before falling silent again. She looked down at the patterns on the table as if she were thinking about something. Meg withdrew his gaze from Sally and didn't say anything else. Everyone would have different answers to the question of freedom based on their own experiences and thoughts. It was a question with no right or wrong answer. Safety, responsibility, obligation, morality, these always conflicted with freedom. Living in this world, there was no one who was truly free. It was the best state to find a comfortable place among these things that could bring freedom to others. Of course, only through self-discipline could one achieve freedom. Meg didn't try to convince Sally as he didn't even know what kind of situation Sally was in. Furthermore, he didn't think that Sally would be conflicted about something like this after her confrontation with Blower the night before. Yabamiya looked at Sally with a concerned expression, but she didn't think she could say anything better. As such, she could only look on with an anxious expression. Sally was thinking about something the entire morning, while Yabamiya was being taught by Meg how to make the perfect ice cream. Yabamiya's cooking talent wasn't very good, but her serious attitude and unyielding spirit were very satisfying to Meg. All of the ice creams that he had failed to make during practice were all placed in a separate compartment in the fridge. After all, each ice cream cost several dozens of copper coins, and it would be too much of a waste to just throw them away. But he was worried that his stomach would be unable to stomach, so he could only put them in the fridge. He had already decided what he was going to do with them. "Boss, is it all right this time?" Yabamiya carefully cradled the ice cream cone in her hands as if it were a priceless treasure, and she turned to Mag with an expectant expression. The two snowballs were perfectly joined together, and there were no signs of misalignment at all. It appeared to be an extremely perfect creation. Mag shook his head and said, "No, the positions of the snowballs are still a little off. The two snowballs aren't completely aligned at the center of the circle. In that case, the direction in which the ice cream melts and slides down will be slightly off." "Is that so?" Yabamiya's expression immediately crumbled. She couldn't see any deviation in the positioning of the two snowballs at all. She looked at the dozen or so ice creams in the fridge and turned to Meg with a dejected and self-reproachful expression as she asked, "Boss, am I stupid? I wasted so much ice cream, but I still can't make it? If a woman as talented as Mia is stupid, then wouldn't I be stupid after having to make over 100 ice creams to reach your current level?" Meg countered with a smile. "Really?" A glimmer of hope reappeared in Yabamiya's eyes as she looked at Meg with incredulity. "Yes, you've already done very well. However, Mamie's provides its customers with the highest quality food, so you have to do your best. Only then can the food appear on the tables of our customers. This is the rule of our restaurant, and it's also the most basic requirement." Meg nodded with a smile. He felt as if he had been possessed by the system when he was being strict. It was just that the system wouldn't gently pour him chicken soup when he failed. "I understand." Yabamiya nodded earnestly as she looked at Meg with a gaze full of respect. For a chef and restaurant owner like Meg, such an attitude was truly worthy of respect. "Host, do you need a chicken soup service? The system has collected 50,000 of the world's most classic types of chicken soups for you. Every time you fail, it will never repeat the same type of chicken soups for you. Each one only costs 1 copper coin. If you activate it now, you can even enjoy the first 500 of them for free." The system's voice rang out, accompanied by the festive background music of dong 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 chong. "There's such a thing?" Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't think that the system would go to such lengths to make money. "Ding. Congratulations to the host for receiving a chicken soup encouragement trial. The host will receive a free trial of 10 of the system's best chicken soups. Would the host like to try it now?" The system's voice sounded again. "Let's hear it." Meg tried asking. "If you do your best with all your heart, you might not even be as good as someone else's. Failure isn't scary. What's scary is that you still believe in it. When you think you're ugly, poor, and worthless, don't despair. Don't despair. At least your judgment is correct." Scram! Meg rolled his eyes in his heart. This damned system was simply poisonous. It actually poisoned the chicken soup and fed it to him one mouthful at a time. Mag took out an eggshell and made a mocha ice cream. The two snowballs were perfectly joined together, and the centers of the conical eggshell and the two snowballs were aligned in a straight line. It was like a perfect piece of art. Chapter 510. The high rankings on the Aiden Square food competition had brought a lot of new customers to Amy's, and the good reputation it had received from its regulars had also attracted many customers with high spending potential. This small restaurant in the westernmost corner of the Aiden Square was gradually gaining a certain level of fame in Chaos City. Due to the fact that there were too many customers in the restaurant, it took a lot of time to get a seat. So many customers chose to take their food away from the restaurant. Some of them were patient enough to wait until they got home to enjoy the food, but most of them couldn't resist the temptation of the food in their hands even before they left the restaurant. They couldn't help but chew on their rugiamos as they walked, and some of them even exclaimed in awe from time to time, "Grandpa, look at what she's holding. It looks so delicious." On the long street of the Aiden Square, a little elf pointed at the ice cream in the hand of a little girl nearby. Her little eyes were wide open, and she couldn't help but gulp at the sight of the little girl licking her ice cream with glee. The little elf appeared to be around 5 or 6 years old. She was wearing an old pink dress, and her long blonde hair was tied into a large braid. She had a pair of pointy little ears, and she was looking at the little girl holding the ice cream with curiosity in her eyes. Beside her was an elderly elf in an old gray robe. His wrinkled face was rather coarse, and he was holding a long staff that was as tall as a grown man. Half of his hair and beard were white, and he was looking down at the little elf with a benevolent smile as he asked, "Do you want some, Anna?" "Yes, yes." Anna nodded vigorously before looking up at the elderly elf with an expectant expression as she asked, "Can I, Grandpa?" "Of course, but we have to know which restaurant is selling this strange food first." Joshua nodded with a smile. Then, "I can ask her where she bought it." Anna's eyes lit up. "There's no need for that. Look, they're all coming from that direction. We just have to look in that direction, and we'll definitely find it." Joshua pointed up ahead. There was more than one person on the street who was holding the strange food that looked like two snowballs stacked on top of each other. "Yay! Let's go, Grandpa." Anna's eyes lit up as she held onto Joshua's hand, and they quickly walked toward the street. "Slow down," Joshua said with a helpless smile. However, his eyes were filled with love when he looked at Anna. "I haven't been to Chaos City for over 20 years, and it has changed a lot. It's becoming more and more prosperous." Joshua couldn't help but sigh with emotion as he looked at the bustling Aden Square and the countless shops lining the square. Over 80 years ago, like most of the elves who had left the Wind Forest, Joshua, who was all by himself, sensed that the elven race was developing in a direction that he didn't like. The centuries of war between species had made him detest war and intrigue, and he didn't want to establish a family. As such, he chose to leave the Wind Forest and began to wander across the Norland continent. While wandering through the mountains and rivers, he would often encounter hostile foreign races, so danger was naturally unavoidable. However, to him, everything seemed rather interesting. At least he still had the feeling of being alive on the road. Moreover, he was able to encounter many interesting people and things, so it could be considered as happiness. However, since more than 10 years ago, he gradually realized that there was a force that was targeting him, trying to force him to return to the Wind Forest to seek protection. Not only was this happening to him, but it was also happening to most of the other elves who had wandered outside the Wind Forest. There were temptations, but there were also threats, and they were becoming more and more aggressive. Most of the elves who wandered outside the Wind Forest were alone or in families, so they were no match for them. "I have to at least give Anna a happy childhood. If she returns to the Wind Forest, she'll most likely never experience freedom again." Joshua looked at Anna, who was holding his hand with an innocent and romantic smile, and heaved an internal sigh. "It's here. Grandpa, that's where they came from." Anna held Joshua's hand as they stopped outside Mamie Restaurant. She was elated to see a child eating an ice cream with an engrossed expression as his father led him out of the restaurant. Yes, Anna found it. A smile also appeared on Joshua's face. He was a little surprised to see this restaurant in the corner of the Aden Square, but it was bustling with people. He held Anna's little hand and led her into the restaurant. "What a beautiful restaurant. It's like a palace, and it smells so good. It smells so good." As soon as they entered the dining hall, the lively Anna suddenly quieted down. She held Joshua's hand and shrunk closer to him. She was a little timid as she scanned her surroundings. Her gaze lingered on the dishes on the tables, and she felt that every dish was exceptionally delicious. These tables and chairs seemed to be made from the same tree in the Wind Forest. Could it be that the owner of this restaurant is an elf? Joshua's attention was completely drawn to the wooden tables and chairs in the restaurant. He was a little surprised, but also a little concerned. Such a tree had to be at least 200 to 300 years old. "Welcome, there are 2 empty seats over there. You two can sit over there." Yabamiya made his way over to them with a smile. He was a little surprised to see 2 elves. It seemed that there had been quite a few elves in the restaurant in recent days. "All right." Joshua nodded as he held onto Anna's little hand, and made his way over to the table where there were still 2 empty seats. However, his footsteps faltered at the sight of Blower, and a hint of hesitation appeared in his eyes. Anna also faltered slightly at the sight of Blower before hiding behind Joshua, seemingly a little fearful of him. They must be elves who are traveling the Norland continent, right? Why is that little girl so scared of me? Blower had also noticed Joshua and Anna, and he was a little perplexed. However, he still put on a benevolent smile on his face, and his handsome features made him appear like a warm spring breeze. Constantine, who was sitting beside him, was completely entranced by the sight of this. He doesn't look like a bad guy. Besides, this is Chaos City, so there shouldn't be any problems. Joshua looked at Blower, then at all of the customers in the restaurant. He hesitated momentarily before holding onto Anna's little hand and making his way over to the table before taking a seat across from Blower. What a beautiful big brother. Anna inched closer to Joshua, but she still couldn't help but steal a glance at Blower. Chapter 5:11. Do I look that scary? Blower raised an eyebrow. This was the first time he had ever been treated so carefully by a child, and he was feeling rather perplexed. The smile on his face became even more vibrant as he turned to Anna and said, "You're so adorable, little girl. Order whatever you want. I'll treat you today, all right?" Anna's eyes lit up upon hearing that, but she didn't reply. Instead, she turned to Joshua as if she were waiting for him to make a decision. "Thank you for your kindness, but Anna only wants to eat one of the things in their hands. I can still afford it." Joshua shook his head with a smile as he looked at the ice cream being held by the customers at the next table. "That's ice cream. If you'd like to order it, you can choose a flavor first. There are 4 flavors to choose from." Yabamiya flipped open the menu to the ice cream page in a thoughtful manner. "Which one would you like, Anna?" Joshua's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of the price of 200 copper coins on the menu, but his frown quickly disappeared as he turned to Anna with a smile. "Wow." Anna's eyes lit up at the sight of the 4 flavors on the menu, and she couldn't help but make her way over to the menu. Her mouth gaped open slightly as she looked at the pictures on the menu, and she was momentarily at a loss as to which one she should choose. "Anna, that's a very nice name. I think the mocha ice cream is super delicious." Even though he had been rejected, Blower still turned to Anna with a smile. Anna looked up at Blower, but she still didn't say anything. However, her attention had indeed been drawn to the mocha ice cream that Blower was pointing at. The mocha ice cream has the aroma of green tea. If you like sweet and sour ice cream, you can choose the blueberry ice cream. If you like sweet and sour ice cream, you can choose the chocolate ice cream. If you like sweet and sour ice cream, you can choose the vanilla ice cream. Yabamiya also introduced the mocha ice cream. According to his experience over the past few days, most of the children didn't really like the mocha ice cream. Instead, they preferred the sweet and sour blueberry ice cream and the super sweet chocolate ice cream. Sweet and sour. Anna pointed at the blueberry ice cream with an elated expression after hearing Yabamiya's introduction. "All right, please get us a blueberry ice cream." Joshua turned to Yabamiya with a smile. "Would you like anything else?" Yabamiya asked. "No need, just an ice cream will do." Joshua closed the menu in front of him with a smile. "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded slightly and turned to walk towards the kitchen with a slight sigh in her heart. Blower looked at Joshua's wrinkled face with a complex mix of emotions, and he didn't know what to do. Anna was waiting for her ice cream with anticipation in her heart. Her gaze fell upon the untouched Yangzhou fried rice in front of Blower, and she suddenly found herself unable to look away. Her stomach began to grumble. She had eaten a simple breakfast in the morning, but she hadn't had anything to eat until now. Even though she was about to eat the delicious ice cream, this beautiful, rainbow-like fried rice also looked delicious and fragrant. "I seem to have ordered too much. Little Anna, can you do me a favor and eat this untouched rainbow fried rice? Every grain of food is a gift from nature, and wasting food is a very bad thing. I don't want to be despised by the god of life," Blower said in an earnest voice as he looked at Anna with a concerned expression. "Grandpa?" A sympathetic look appeared on Anna's face at the sight of the distressed Blower. She then turned to the plate of fried rice, and she had never seen anything as beautiful as this. She swallowed involuntarily as she turned to Joshua with a pleading expression. Blower also turned to Joshua with a benevolent look in his eyes. "All right, thank you very much." Joshua looked at the expectant Anna, then at the sincere Blower. He hesitated momentarily before turning to Blower with a grateful expression. He had lived for over 700 years and had traversed almost the entire Norland continent. He had seen all types of people and things, and he was generally a good judge of character. At the very least, his eyes wouldn't lie. A person's good and bad qualities could be seen in their eyes. Blower's eyes were very clear, and even among elves, it was very rare to see someone with such clear eyes. There were traces of magic elements on Blower's body, and even though he didn't appear to be very old, he was already very powerful. From his mannerisms, it was clear that he had come from a major family in the Wind Forest. However, the benevolence that he was displaying toward Anna was genuine. The Wind Forest was his home, after all, and not all members of major families were bad people. That was something that Joshua had always kept in mind. At the very least, the princess had helped him in the past, and it was also because of her that Anna was living with him. "Then, I'll help you eat it." Anna looked at Blower with a voice that was as crisp as a nightingale's, but a little timid. "All right, then I'll have to trouble you, little Anna." Blower placed the plate of fried rice in front of Anna with a smile before handing a spoon to her. "Thank you." Anna accepted the spoon, and her eyes were completely drawn to the fried rice before her. The alluring aroma wafted toward her, and her hungry stomach growled even louder. She scooped a spoonful of fried rice into her mouth, and her little mouth was bulging, but her eyes were wide open, as if there were little stars shimmering within them. "It's so delicious." Anna finished an entire mouthful of fried rice with an elated expression. She then scooped a spoonful of fried rice into Joshua's mouth and handed it over to him with an expectant look on her face as she said, "Have a taste, Grandpa. It really is super delicious." "Grandpa isn't hungry, Anna. You can only grow up quickly if you eat your fill." Joshua shook his head with a smile. He had just taken a look at the menu and found that a plate of Yangzhou fried rice like this cost 600 copper coins. He was already old, and he had to take care of Anna, so he didn't have much money in his pocket. As such, Anna didn't have many opportunities to eat such expensive and delicious food. "No, Grandpa has to eat as well. Otherwise, Anna won't eat." Anna shook her head with a firm expression. Joshua looked at Anna's serious expression, and he accepted the spoonful of fried rice in a resigned manner. Anna was very young, but she was very stubborn. Once she set her mind on something, she would do it no matter what. This flavor. Joshua's eyes immediately widened. He was in disbelief of the delicious fried rice, but what was truly astonishing to him was the faint aroma wafting through the air. He felt as if a memory that had been buried deep within his memory had been unearthed, and he could ascertain that this was the flavor of the spring of life. Over 100 years ago, the Elven Queen had bestowed a cup of the spring of life upon the elves who had made outstanding contributions during the war among species. Even though it was only a small cup, he was unable to forget the flavor of the spring of life. Perhaps it had become a form of sustenance for his hometown in the past 100 years. Who would have thought that he would taste this flavor again in a restaurant in Chaos City? Chapter 512. Anna was happily eating her fried rice, and Sally had arrived beside them to eavesdrop on their conversation. She had never come into contact with elves outside of the Wind Forest before, so she was quite curious about their lifestyle. At the same time, she wanted to see if what these elves thought was really what they wanted. What kind of sparks will fly between two young masters from a major elven family and a pair of ordinary elven granddaughter and granddaughter? In the kitchen, Mag was also looking at Joshua, Blower, and the others with a curious look on his face. He had read a lot of information about the elven race, so he had a rough understanding of the elven race. He didn't want to make too many judgments about how the elven race was run. The current elven race was indeed more powerful than before, and they were far more united than the demons. However, all of the questions that followed, such as the questions about freedom that Sally had asked that morning, were most likely questions that many elves were conflicted about. That's right. We've been to many places on the Norland continent, and we plan to visit even more places. Joshua nodded. His aged face was full of smiles, and even the wrinkles on his face were blooming with joy. That must be very interesting, right? Blower was also infected by Joshua's smile, and he asked with a curious smile, "You'll encounter all kinds of people and things on your journey. Not all of them are pleasant, but most of them are interesting. Furthermore, as long as you're traveling, you'll feel like you're free, even if you're wandering without a destination," Joshua replied in a calm manner. "Freedom on your journey?" A contemplative look appeared on Blower's face. "Even if you're wandering without a destination, is that still better than staying in the wind forest?" Sally was also in deep thought. She had never thought that she would hear something like this from a wandering elf. This was an unprecedented shock to her. "Can you tell me about the interesting places that you've been to? Perhaps I'll also embark on a journey in the future, but I prefer to travel with a destination." Blower looked at Joshua with a smile. "It's not a bad thing for young people like you to go out and explore." Joshua's smile widened, and he began to recount some of the interesting places that he had visited during his long journey. Fishing in the icy lakes of the Goro Snow Mountains in the northwest of the Roth Empire, surfing on the islands around the Dragon Island, chasing wild chickens in the Twilight Forest. All of these stories came out of Joshua's mouth, and they were full of life and beauty. It was fascinating to listen to. Not only Blower and Sally, but all of the other customers were also listening intently. People like to stay in their own comfort zone, so very few people could set everything aside and embark on a journey without any hesitation. So it turns out that the scenery on the journey isn't endless persecution, but more of the magnificent scenery and kind travelers. Sally's state of mind was gradually changing. Her subjective beliefs were being dispelled, and she began to accept things that were different from what the teachers and adults in the Wind Forest were telling her. Meanwhile, Blower's eyes were glowing brighter and brighter. He would ask Joshua a few questions whenever he heard something that piqued his interest so that he could provide a more detailed explanation. Little elves. Amy sat behind the counter with Ugly Duckling in her arms as she looked at Anna with glowing eyes. This was the first elven customer to visit the restaurant. She looked down at herself, and a hesitant look appeared on her face. She was different from Anna. Anna was a true elf, while she was only a half-elf. All of the other elves had golden hair, but her hair was silver. She was completely different from them, and that made her feel a little dejected. What's she thinking about? Looks like she's still holding a grudge over the 10 points. Meg had also noticed Amy's silence. Under normal circumstances, she definitely wouldn't just sit there and do nothing. The prejudice of this world toward half-breeds would eventually be reflected on them. Even though they hadn't done anything wrong, they would still be looked at with strange eyes. Meg hadn't thought of a good solution to this problem yet, so he could only try to change the minds of the customers in the restaurant. Joshua's vast knowledge and eloquence were very captivating, and all of his stories were very intriguing. Everyone was struck by the urge to pack their bags and set off on their journey. When he talked about some of the more interesting things, he would often evoke raucous laughter, as if he were a storyteller. Sally's conflicted expression had also been replaced by one of fascination. She had traveled all the way from the Wind Forest to the south, and in order to avoid being tracked, she had neglected many of the scenery and people on her journey. However, from Joshua's words, she could see a different attitude toward traveling. He really likes freedom, and he's living in freedom. Sally looked at Joshua's smiling face. This was a rare sight to see in the Wind Forest. It seemed that everyone was becoming less and less fond of smiling. Even the wealthiest members of the major families had all kinds of unfulfilled desires, and they weren't truly happy. Anna finished an entire plate of Yangzhou fried rice, and only then did Yabamiya serve her the blueberry ice cream. Anna carefully held the ice cream in her hands, and her little face completely lit up. She looked at the 2 bluish-purple snowballs and hesitated momentarily before licking them with her little tongue. A sweet and sour flavor rose up from the tip of her tongue before spreading through her mouth. An incredulous look appeared on Anna's face. She had never tasted such a special food before. Even though they were both snowballs, they were different from the snowballs that fell from the sky in winter. These snowballs had a much more delicate texture. It's sweet and sour. It's so delicious. Anna was elated as she focused on eating the ice cream, and the smile on her little face became more and more vibrant. She's so adorable, but it's going to be very troublesome to bring her along. Blower looked at Anna, who was carefully licking her ice cream, and couldn't help but chuckle internally. Even though this was the first time they had met, the pair of granddaughter and granddaughter had left him with a very good impression. Furthermore, they had verified his hypothesis, and he couldn't help but turn to Sally. Sally's expression was a little complex. She could sense Blower's gaze and hesitated momentarily before asking, "Why don't you two go back to the wind forest? You'll be safe there, and you won't have to face any of the dangers of your journey." Chapter 5:13. It's a pity that I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to that big sister. Amy looked on with a forlorn expression as Anna and Joshua walked away. What an adorable little girl. However, they're still quite wary of elves. Blower thought to himself as he looked at Anna, who was happily licking her ice cream. He then turned to Sally, who wore a complex expression on her face and also paid the bill before departing. Sally looked at the door in a daze. The belief that had sustained her from leaving the wind forest was beginning to crumble. Could it be that the wind forest really had become a prison for the elves, just as Blower had said? Were the elves living outside the forest really happier than the elves living in the forest? A series of questions appeared in Sally's mind, and the answers were already beginning to emerge, but she didn't dare to think about them. Fight for true freedom for the ordinary elves. Blower's words from the night before reverberated through her mind, and the dejected faces of Joshua and Anna appeared in her mind at the same time. It was as if a beam of light had lit up in her mind, and she suddenly knew what she had to do. 5 kilometers away from Chaos City, there was a dilapidated village in the northeast. In a large courtyard, a few burly demons and orcs were feasting on meat and drinking wine. There was no one living in the village, but there was a tall wall that was 4 to 5 meters tall around the courtyard. There were several dozen demons and orcs patrolling the walls. "Boss, we've caught a lot of piglets this month. We should be able to earn a lot of money, right?" In the courtyard, an orc with a sinister scar on his face turned to the portly abyssal demon sitting at the head of the table and asked. The other demons and orcs also turned to him upon hearing that, and greed flashed in their eyes. "Earn my ass. We just received news yesterday that the piglets we caught are too weak. From this month onward, we'll be paying them according to their power level. Those below the 3rd tier won't even be enough for us to have a drink." Olaf slammed his bowl of wine onto the table with an enraged expression. How could something like that happen? Aren't they being too immoral? Yeah, why did they suddenly change the rules? In the past, they even wanted pigs that didn't know magic. The pigs we caught this month aren't that strong. There are less than 10 level 3 and above, and most of them are level 4. These piglets are good at escaping. As long as they are in the forest, it will be very difficult for us to catch them. The expressions of the demons and orcs changed upon hearing this, and they immediately began to discuss angrily. "Boss, I think we should discuss this matter with the higher-ups. If we do that, we won't be able to make a living. Even if we sell these piglets to the Demon Islands and Rodu, they'll still fetch more than this price, right?" The orc who had spoken earlier suggested. "That's right. We even gave those piglets good food and drinks for them. Our brothers were so greedy that they didn't touch them. They just wanted to get more money. Now, if that's the case, we might as well sell them. We can let our brothers have some fun before we sell them," a minotaur demon said with his eyes wide open. All of the other orcs and demons also chimed in, and they were all itching to make a move. Olaf looked at everyone with a cold expression and said, "If you want to die, then go ahead. Don't forget that Garen's team was completely wiped out last year because they forced themselves on a piglet. Every single mercenary team received a finger. All of the demons and orcs fell completely silent, as if they had been doused with cold water. Olaf looked at everyone and continued, "You have to remember that we're doing this for money. If the piglets dare to resist us, then we can kill one or two of them. However, there are some things that we can't do, so you better keep your hands clean. Otherwise, don't blame me for being merciless. If you want women, take the money, and there are plenty of them in Chaos City." Yes, all of the demons and orcs hurriedly lowered their heads in response. Olaf was the most powerful in this mercenary team, and he had already reached the 8th tier. The other two vice-commanders were also only at the 7th tier, so his words held absolute authority. "Terry, Ebenezer, come with me." Olaf stood up and made his way inside, and the two vice-commanders hurriedly followed along. "Terry, take a trip back to the Demon Islands and find out more about the piglets in the black market. See how much they're worth, then change your identity and set up a channel. After that, take a trip to Rodu and see how much they're worth, then set up a channel as well. Remember, don't let anyone know who you are." Olaf led the two of them into a large room and waved a hand to close the door. At the same time, a soundproof spell enshrouded the entire room as he spoke to the Minotaur demon. "Huh." Terry and Ebenezer's eyes widened in unison as they stared at Olaf with incredulity in their eyes. "Boss, didn't you just say that we can't do something like this?" Terry gulped. Olaf's words had given him quite a fright, and now that he was suddenly being asked to set up a channel, he was unable to wrap his head around the idea. "The Wind Forest is keeping the price down far too low. If we fail to sell these piglets, then we'll be making a huge loss. We've never done business where we're at a loss. However, only the three of us can know about this. We can't let our subordinates know about this. Those idiots' brains are filled with mush. The piglets have to be clean in order to sell for a good price. If they've played with them, then they'll have to sell them for cheap." Olaf pursed his lips. "But the Wind Forest, if they find out about this..." Ebenezer was a little concerned. "That's why we have to keep this a secret. Otherwise, even if we die, the three of us won't be able to escape death." Olaf's expression also became very grave as he looked at Ebenezer and said, "However, I've already thought of a way to deal with this. We can't sever our partnership with the Wind Forest for now. Otherwise, our actions will become very obvious. However, we have to become more efficient, so we have to shift our target to those powerful piglets. Only they can get rich rewards from the Wind Forest." Ebenezer nodded and said, "There are indeed many powerful piglets in Chaos City, but they all have fixed residences and connections in Chaos City. If we target them, then we could attract the attention of the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle. Then..." Chapter 514. "Grandpa, this ice cream is so delicious. Can we stay here for a few more days? I want to eat some more ice cream." Anna held a bowl of ice cream in her hands as she looked up at Joshua with anticipation in her eyes. "Thank you, Joshua. Does Anna really like ice cream that much?" Joshua looked at Anna with a smile. This was the first time that he had seen Anna so obsessed with something. "Yes, this is the best thing I've ever had." Anna nodded with an earnest expression. The sweet and sour flavor of the blueberry ice cream struck her with a sense of wonder. Why did it have such a unique flavor? It tasted like milk, but also like fruit. However, it was clearly a snowball. It was simply too miraculous. "All right, then we'll continue tomorrow. However, we can't stay in one place for too long. Perhaps there'll be some delicious food waiting for us at the next place." Joshua nodded with a smile. Even though the ice cream was rather expensive, he could still afford it. After all, he was a 6th-tier magic caster, and he would often concoct some potions to sell during the journey, so he wouldn't be too poor during the journey. Of course, if he were traveling in the wild, he wouldn't need to use gold coins. Wild fruits and dew were the best food for elves. Just what kind of background does that restaurant have? It can use the spring of life to cook, so that girl must be the daughter of some family. Why is she working as a waitress in a restaurant? That young man is a good person, and he's quite similar to the princess from back in the day. Joshua was quite curious, but he quickly shook his head and didn't continue to think about it. He would always encounter all types of interesting people and events during his travels, but he would only see most of them once in his life, so there was no need to learn so much about them. This was something that Joshua had learned during his century-long journey. After lunch, Sally cleaned up the restaurant before leaving. She only said that she was going out for a walk. Meg didn't say anything to that. He could roughly guess what Sally was feeling, but he didn't have any good ideas to make her feel less conflicted. "Father, a lot of people greeted me on the way to class today, and they all seemed to recognize me," Amy said to Meg as she held Ugly Duckling in her arms with elation on her little face. "Amy is the little hero of Chaos School now, so of course many people would recognize you," Meg said with a smile. Amy had become famous after yesterday's battle. Hee hee, Amy likes to beat up bad guys. "Beating up bad guys can make a lot of people like you," Amy said with a smile. "Well, beating up bad guys is a good thing, but we also have to act according to our strength. If some bad guys are too strong, we have to know how to retreat and deal with them when we become stronger," Meg said with a smile. "Okay, Amy will remember that." Amy nodded seriously. "Good girl." Meg patted Amy's head with a smile. Looking at the smile on her face, he couldn't get rid of the image of her slightly fearful expression when she looked at that little elf girl just now. Racial discrimination was a problem on the entire Norland continent. Although Chaos School and Chaos City had been trying to change the situation, in Chaos City, the Aiden Chamber of Commerce still had a clause that discriminated against half-race waitresses. It would take hundreds of years before the entire world could be changed. Looks like the steam engine project has to be put on the agenda. It's not easy to change the world, so I'll start by changing the president of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. If I can't change him, then I'll subvert and replace him. This was something his father had once told him in his previous life. At that time, he was still being groomed as a successor. However, later on, it was proven that a successor without initiative was not enough to become an outstanding successor. However, this sentence had always remained in his heart. It's time to spend more money to get some information related to Family Moraton in the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Meg thought to himself. He obviously couldn't rely on himself to deal with such a colossus. He had to find a suitable partner. In the evening, Meg went upstairs to check on the brewing of the beer. The machine was running smoothly, and the delicious beer would be ready by the next morning. Something had happened. There was also wine in this world, but because of the way it was brewed, barley wine tasted a little bitter. It wasn't as refreshing as beer, and of course, its quality couldn't be compared to Meg's beer. However, Meg was very interested in the wine that had been stored for hundreds of years. After all, this was a magical world, and some races had very long lives. A bottle of wine that had been stored in the cellar for 200 years might just be a bottle of wine that had been stored in the cellar when they were young. I wonder if they can drink beer that they're used to. Meg was a little expectant. It would be awkward if the best-selling beer on Earth didn't adapt to this world. Night fell, and Amy's was still brightly lit. Customers were streaming in and out of the restaurant almost non-stop, and the owners of the other restaurants were all very envious. The outdoor seats at the entrance of the restaurant were also full. Many of the customers who had abnormal reactions to the delicious food chose to sit outside. The metal tables and chairs ensured that they didn't have to worry about accidentally damaging the food in the restaurant during their meal. At night, it seems to look more artistic outside. Blower had arrived a little later that night, and his eyes lit up at the sight of the outdoor tables lit by small lamps in each of the four corners of the restaurant. It was very relaxing to be able to enjoy the autumn breeze outside, eat delicious food, and admire the moon. Two customers just so happened to have finished their meal and were about to leave, so he made his way over to them and sat down. Sally cleaned up the table and took a glance at him before making her way into the restaurant without saying anything. Blower also didn't say anything. They had agreed to meet that night, and after speaking with Joshua and his granddaughter at noon, he was even more confident that he could convince Sally. Blower sat down and turned to Yabamiya as he said, "I'll have a Yangzhou fried rice, a sweet tofu pudding, and a mocha ice cream. Bring them up one by one." "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamiya Mia smiled as she turned to walk into the restaurant. Boom! Right at this moment, an explosion suddenly erupted in the Aiden Square. A ball of flames rose up from not far away, and the ground seemed to tremor slightly. What's that? Many people turned toward that direction, and were quite surprised that someone would dare to attack someone in the Aiden Square. Chapter 5:15. The Aiden Square was extremely vast, and there were massive trees that were over 100 years old everywhere. The sound of explosions and violent magic fluctuations erupted from deep within the square. Right at this moment, an elderly figure drenched in blood rushed out of the forest with a child in his arms. He was staggering slightly, but he didn't slow down in the slightest. Behind him, a tall six-armed snake demon was chasing after him. It had a huge body, and its six waving arms were holding all kinds of weapons. The lower half of its body was twisting its black snake tail, crushing everything in its path. With a swing of its tail, a tree as thick as a person's encirclement was directly smashed apart. Behind the six-armed snake demon, there were 4 or 5 demons and beast men following closely behind. They were approaching in a semi-arc formation at an extremely fast speed. It looked like they would soon catch up with the 2 people fleeing in front. The sinister smiles on their faces were already clearly visible. Joshua and Anna. Blower looked at the 2 elves running in front of him with astonishment in his eyes. However, his expression immediately darkened at the sight of the gaping hole in Joshua's chest. That was a lethal wound. So why would these people pursue such a harmless pair of grandfather and grandson? A dark green wand appeared in his hand, upon which green light began to emanate from the tip of the wand. What powerful magic fluctuations! Sally was cleaning up the table with a tray, and she looked out of the restaurant with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She then caught sight of the disheveled Joshua, who was still carrying Anna in his arms. Her expression immediately changed, and she hurriedly rushed out of the restaurant. "Big brother, save us!" Anna yelled with elation at the sight of Blower with her pale face. Joshua also looked at Blower with a hint of hope in his eyes. He stepped onto a nearby bush and rushed toward Amy's even faster, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Sinister wooden wall appear. Blower yelled as he pointed his wand behind Joshua. Green light flashed, and a green wooden wall that was 3 meters tall and 5 meters wide abruptly appeared behind Joshua. The spells and hidden weapons unleashed by the demons behind him all struck the wooden wall, causing it to tremor violently. After taking a dark explosive ball from the 6-armed snake demon, the wooden wall was completely reduced to specks of green light. "Who are you? Why are you hunting down elves on the streets?" However, Blower had already arrived beside Joshua and Anna. He extended a hand to support Joshua's arm as he glowered at the 6-armed snake demon and the orcs with a cold expression. All of the customers in the restaurant looked on with curiosity in their eyes. Some of them recognized Joshua and Anna as the 2 elves they had encountered during their trip to the Jiangsu province. They couldn't help but feel sympathetic toward them, wondering how they had managed to attract the attention of these terrifying demons. That damned meddlesome bastard. Even though this piglet is a male, he's even prettier than a female. If I can capture him, I'll definitely be able to sell him for a good price. However, this guy is quite powerful. He's at least a 7th-tier magic caster. I can't cause too much of a commotion in Chaos City. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for me to escape. Even if I fail today, I have to kill that old bastard first. Otherwise, I'll be exposed. Ebenezer stopped in his tracks and stared coldly at Blower with his inverted green triangular eyes. He then turned to Joshua with an enraged expression and said, "This old bastard stole from me and killed 2 of my brothers who were guarding the door. I'm going to capture him and avenge my brothers." "Do you think I'll believe that?" Blower's expression became even colder as he turned to Sally, who was standing at the entrance of the restaurant, and said, "You save him?" Sally was initially at a loss for what to do, but she looked into Blower's eyes. Even though Blower's tone was quite commanding, she didn't offer any objections. Instead, She hurried over to support the deathly pale Joshua, who was already unable to speak. After laying him down on the ground, a green light appeared on Sally's fingertips, and she gently pressed her hand against the wound on his chest. The wound began to heal, but her expression didn't relax in the slightest. Instead, it became even more grave. His injuries were very severe, and he had most likely burned away his life force to unleash a spell. What little life force he had left had already been burned away, so even the milk of life wouldn't be able to help him. Grandpa, Grandpa, don't fall asleep. Anna's scared. Anna can't live without you. Anna knelt beside Joshua, crying her eyes out. She held Joshua's wrinkled hand with her small hand. Ebenezer took a glance at Sally. He didn't think that there would be such a beautiful elf here, and it appeared that she was quite powerful as well. She appeared to be an employee of this restaurant. He would have to go back and discuss this with Boss and find an opportunity to capture her. She would definitely be able to fetch a good price. He then took a glance at Joshua, whose face was gradually turning ruddy, and turned to Blower as he said, "I advise you to mind your own business, brat. We have witnesses and evidence, and we have to capture these two thieves today. Even if the Gray Temple comes, they'll be on our side." You're telling me that an old elf with a granddaughter would steal the treasures of a bunch of demons and orcs? Even if you're making up a story, you have to come up with a better one, right? I'm going to protect this man no matter what. Blower's expression became even colder as he listened to Anna's sobs. He had already guessed what had happened. Very good. You are very arrogant. I want to see how powerful you, a pig who looks like a woman, are. Ebenezer's triangular eyes stood up as he waved all three of his arms through the air. Capture them. All of the demons and orcs surrounding the entrance of the restaurant pounced toward Blower and the others in unison. Ebenezer chanted a complex incantation as black light began to gather on his 6 arms. The customers in the restaurant craned their necks to look at the commotion outside the restaurant. They looked at Joshua, who was lying on the ground, and Anna, who was sobbing on the ground. They couldn't help but feel pity for the arrogant demon and orc. Seeing this scene, they couldn't help but feel a little worried. Yabamiya stood off to the side with a concerned expression. However, she stopped in her tracks at the sight of the bloodied Joshua. She was worried that she would cause trouble for Sally, but she still stood in front of them with the tray in her hands. That old man looks so pitiful. Should I go and help him? Cece stood at the entrance of the magic potion shop as she looked at Joshua with a sympathetic expression. But they're elves. If we get exposed... Lulu grabbed onto Cece's wrist with a concerned expression. Lulu, if it weren't for young Mistress Sally, we would have already died. What do normal elves have to do with the destruction of our race? Cece turned to look into Lulu's eyes with a serious expression. Go. I'll help him keep those guys at bay. Lulu looked into Cece's eyes in silence for a moment before nodding with a serious expression. She stepped forward and transformed into a giant bear before pouncing toward the demon at the very edge of the group. Chapter 5:16. The ball of ice and fire passed over everyone's heads before hurtling toward Ebenezer with a trail of red and white mist trailing behind it. Heh, little brat. Ebenezer pursed his lips with disdain as he swung his mace toward the ball of ice and fire. Most of his attention was focused on the oncoming bear and Blower. The bear that had appeared out of nowhere was not to be underestimated, and Blower was also a 7th-tier magic caster. He was the only 7th-tier magic caster on their side, so he had to end this battle as quickly as possible and find an opportunity to kill that old bastard first. Boom! The ball of ice and fire exploded on the mace, and in the instant that ice and fire intertwined, an enormous burst of energy erupted forth in all directions. The expression of Ebenezer, who had been nonchalant about the attack, changed drastically. 2 magic barriers rose up around him, barely managing to block the red and white energy waves before they could strike him. The barriers shuddered, and they were almost destroyed. How could this little brat possess such terrifying power? Ebenezer stared with incredulity at Amy, who was standing at the entrance of the restaurant with her wand raised in her hand. He had thought that it would only be a small fireball that could be easily taken care of, but he didn't think that the power of that fireball would be no less powerful than that of a fourth-tier magic caster. If he were to be caught completely off guard, even his sturdy scales wouldn't be able to completely block it. However, if I can capture this little brat, the Wind Forest should be willing to pay an exorbitant price for her, right? A cold light flashed through Ebenezer's eyes as a thought occurred to him. The Wind Forest would definitely be interested in a super prodigy like Amy. This was most likely going to be the biggest deal they would ever make. Little Amy is so powerful. All of the customers were also stunned. They were initially in disbelief when they heard that Amy had defeated a fourth-tier magic caster, but after witnessing her true power, all of their doubts had been completely erased. A 4-year-old fourth-tier magic caster was enough to make the entire magic world go insane. No, it should be the entire Norland continent. Call for reinforcements. Ebenezer turned to the orc beside him with a grave expression. 3 7th-tier magic casters and a little brat with strange powers were no longer something that they could handle. He didn't know when the people from the Grey Temple would arrive. Before that, he had to get rid of that old man. He didn't know how this old thing found out where they were keeping the piggies, but before he could find them, they came knocking on his door and even injured 2 of his brothers who were guarding the door. He had led his men all the way here, thinking that they would be able to catch up to an old man who was only a 6th-tier powerhouse. Little did he expect that after chasing all the way to Chaos City, these nosy fellows would jump out just as he was about to catch up. If he were to divulge the location, then they would have to give up on that stronghold. All of their efforts over the years would go to waste, and they would even attract the attention of the Grey Temple. They wouldn't be able to continue to hunt pigs near Chaos City, and that would definitely be a huge blow to their reputation. One had to realize that not only did they receive a lot of money from the Wind Forest every year, they also received some cultivation resources from the Wind Forest. They even received some spring of life water from the Wind Forest, so those things were worth risking their lives for. This old thing was definitely going to die. That magic spell he just unleashed had punctured his heart, yet he was still able to run all the way here with that little piggy in his arms. The most important thing now was to make sure that he didn't say anything that he shouldn't say before he died. Yes. The orc took a few steps back before pulling out a small box from his pocket. He opened the box, and 3 black moths flew out before quickly disappearing into the darkness. The demons and orcs were already engaged in a fierce battle with Lulu, who had transformed into a giant bear. Lulu was clearly far more powerful than them, but they were able to take advantage of their numerical advantage to surround and attack her, so they were unable to gain the upper hand. Ebenezer looked at Blower, and his 6 arms and his massive serpentine tail writhed around in an unsettling manner. He was trying to think of a way to bypass Blower's annoying wood-type magic, or perhaps wait for the old bastard to die before he could do so. Meg had arrived at the entrance of the restaurant at some point. He stood beside Amy, and his brows furrowed as he looked at Joshua and the sobbing Anna with sympathy in his eyes. "Father, that big sister is so pitiful. Can we help them?" Amy looked up at him and asked in a quiet voice. "That big brother, Aisha, and Lulu are already helping them, so there's no need for us to do anything for now. Otherwise, we'll only add to their troubles." Meg shook his head. Blower, Sally, and Lulu were more than enough to deal with the current situation. The most important thing now was whether they could save the severely wounded Joshua. Amy nodded with a thoughtful expression. Then, she murmured to herself, "If they can't beat us, then I'll come and help them." "Grandpa, Grandpa, wake up. Anna can't live without you." Anna gently shook Joshua's arm. Tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto Joshua's arm. "Let me help you." Cece quickly made her way over to Sally's side. She squatted down, and a little green sapling appeared in her hand. There were already 5 vibrant green leaves on the sapling, and a 3rd branch had also sprouted. Wisps of green light fell from the sapling, enshrouding Joshua's entire body within. The bleeding had already stopped, and the wounds had already healed, but Joshua's life force was still rapidly depleting. Cece looked at Anna with a heavy heart. She patted her head gently, wondering if she would be able to bid farewell to her grandfather. Joshua felt as if his soul had left his body and arrived in a strange space, where he saw his 800 years of life. He was born in the Wind Forest and spent his childhood and youth there. At that time, trees that were thousands of years old could be seen everywhere in the Wind Forest. The elves played with the birds and beasts in the forest, and they ate fruits as their food. Time passed so slowly, and every day was free and carefree. There was no concept of money, and there was no hierarchy. All elves were equals, and they lived in harmony. After that, the orcs and demons came. Chapter 5:17. The Wind Forest's tranquility was shattered, and smoke rose up from all directions. The demons and orcs had left a vast expanse of desolation in their wake, foreshadowing the elven race's fate. Some elves tried to escape from the Wind Forest, but the world outside the Wind Forest was even more chaotic. The entire Norland continent had been plunged into the flames of war. A racial war had engulfed the entire continent, and no race could stay out of it. Just when the elves were in despair, the Elven Queen and High Priestess Helena appeared out of nowhere like saviors. The Elven Queen had great strength and military talent. She led the Elven guards that were temporarily put together in every battle and forcefully blocked the orcs and demons outside the Elven Holy Land. She even gained the recognition of the Tree of Life. At the time, the Elven Queen was the goddess in the hearts of all elves and was worshipped by all of them. Aside from her powerful star magic, High Priestess Helena's greatest contribution was to raise the morale of all of the elves when they were in a state of panic. She encouraged more elves to become warriors in order to protect the Wind Forest, and they picked up their bows and wands to repel the invaders. Joshua also became a warrior, and he fought to protect the Wind Forest. He had killed orcs and demons, and he had also been wounded in battle. However, in desperate situations, he could always see hope and victory in the Elven Queen's command. This long and drawn-out war between species finally came to an end 100 years ago. The elves had paid an extremely heavy price to keep most of the invading demons and orcs in the Wind Forest forever. On that day, Mistress Helena signed a peace treaty with all of the other races in Chaos City, and the Elven race legally owned the Wind Forest. When news of this reached the Wind Forest, the Elven race was in an uproar, and they celebrated for half a month. It was as if they could return to the Wind Forest. At least, that was what Joshua thought at the time. And that was what many of the elves who had fought in the war were thinking as well. After that, High Priestess Helena returned to the Wind Forest and began to reward the elves who had contributed to the war by giving them money and territory. All of this seemed to be indisputable. What they had done in the war was worth all of this, and even better. But Joshua felt that everything had changed. In the past, the elves didn't have gold coins or official positions. Everyone was equal, had no territory, and could freely travel anywhere. Therefore, after thinking for 3 days, he rejected High Priestess Helena's offer of a piece of land. Like many other elves, he chose to leave the Wind Forest and began to travel the continent. He wanted to leave this place where he had experienced war and where his comrades were buried. Back on the Norland continent, the war between species had just concluded, and all of the races were resting and recuperating. Aside from the territories of demons and orcs, the rest of the continent was basically unimpeded and not dangerous. Thus, the wandering elves gradually forgot about the war and began a new life. The knot in Joshua's heart gradually unraveled during his travels. He met many people and made friends with some of the other wandering elves. Sometimes, he would even travel with them, and his life was very carefree and relaxed. However, those days were shattered over 20 years ago. A group of demons and orcs began to appear on the Norland continent, targeting wandering elves like them. All of the stray elves were captured and thrown into low metal cages before being locked up in dark underground cellars. It was as if the Dark Age had descended upon the Norland continent again, and the elves were struck by a wave of panic and fear. There were elves who returned to the Wind Forest for help, but they were forced to stay in the forest, and were no longer allowed to leave. The elves no longer had the right to leave the forest freely, and the major families had already divided the entire elven race. More and more elves mysteriously disappeared, and the major families in the Wind Forest gained more and more elven slaves. All of them had been branded with magic marks and were forbidden from leaving their territories. Joshua discovered this 20 years ago. At the time, he went to visit a friend, but his friend's house was a complete mess. He found a line of words under a rock, and it stated that the couple had been captured by demons and orcs. After that, he met an elf who had just escaped from the forest not long ago. He told him that he had seen the couple in a major elven family, but one of the male elf's legs had been broken, and he had been enslaved to the lowest rung of society. This incident dealt a heavy blow to Joshua's heart. After the conclusion of the war among species, the biggest threat to the elves wasn't the other races. Instead, it was the new nobles in the forest. The nobles among the elves were laughable and lamentable. He didn't understand how those nobles could bear to do such a thing to the elves who had fought alongside them and sacrificed everything to protect the Wind Forest. However, what could he do? If he returned to the Wind Forest of his own accord, he would also lose his freedom, and elves like him, who had been labeled as wanderers and outcasts, had no right to speak. Therefore, the traveling elves continued to wander like frightened birds, enjoying the freedom that they didn't know when it would come to an end. Not compromising was their last stand for freedom. More and more elves disappeared, and the demons and orcs hunted them all over the continent. The number of mercenary groups increased, and they were extremely arrogant. This situation continued until 6 years ago. That year, Princess Irina left the Wind Forest and began to travel the continent. Then, a mercenary group set their eyes on her. In the end, the group was wiped out. And this was just the beginning. One by one, the mercenary groups were wiped out by the magic staff of the elven princess. The roles of the cat and the mouse were switched at that moment. The once arrogant mercenary groups began to flee the continent, just so that they wouldn't be found by the princess. To the traveling elves, Princess Irina was like a queen who appeared out of nowhere during the Dark Age. She appeared as a savior, destroying the evil mercenary groups and rescuing the imprisoned elves. She received the fanatical love of the traveling elves. Under Princess Irina's attacks and deterrence, half of the mercenary groups were wiped out, and the rest disbanded and went into hiding. They didn't dare to do anything to the elves, and freedom was restored. The first time Joshua saw Princess Irina was 5 years ago. He was severely injured in a battle with the demons while helping an elven couple. Just when he was in despair, Princess Irina and the man with the heavy sword arrived and destroyed all the demons with a wave of their hands. However, the couple had already died in the hands of the demons in order to protect their daughter, leaving behind a little elf who was less than a year old. Irina healed his injuries and then handed the child to him, asking him to raise her. She named the child Anna. Princess Irina returned to the Wind Forest 3 years ago, and there was no news of her since then. The hibernating mercenary groups appeared again and continued to capture the wandering elves. Life became difficult again. Joshua took Anna to many places, and they depended on each other. He tried his best to teach her to become a free and kind elf. She was his only hope, and he was willing to give up everything to protect her, including his life. Grandpa, Grandpa, Joshua's soul was about to dissipate, and he suddenly heard a sorrowful cry. Chapter 5:18. Father, he's awake. Amy was elated as she patted her little chest as if she were heaving a sigh of relief. Meg and all of the customers also heaved a collective sigh of relief. With Sally and Cece here, it would be difficult for Joshua to die even if he wanted to. Cece looked at Joshua, whose face had suddenly become a little flushed, and withdrew her hand with a complex expression. The small world tree disappeared into her palm as a streak of green light. Sally's lips quivered as she withdrew her hand with a reluctant expression. She had already tried her best, but Joshua didn't have much time left to live. Now that his life force had been completely exhausted, death was inevitable. Blower was also elated to see Joshua, but his heart instantly sank at the sight of Sally and Cece's expressions. It appeared that the worst-case scenario had still happened. He couldn't bear to see the elated smile on Anna's face. "Grandpa, you're finally awake. That's great. I thought you didn't want Anna anymore." Anna's little hand pressed Joshua's big hand against her face. She said with a sobbing tone, her face full of surprise, "That damned old bastard is still alive." A cold light flashed through Ebenezer's inverted triangular eyes as he glared at Joshua. He waved his uppermost pair of arms through the air, and two black magic balls hurtled toward Joshua. At the same time, he whipped his massive serpentine tail through the air, and his other four arms charged toward the entrance of the restaurant. "You bastards should be the ones to die." Blower looked at Ebenezer with a cold expression as he waved his wand through the air. A green barrier of light appeared before him, just in time to block the two black magic balls. A dull thump erupted as the two balls of light were destroyed in midair. Vines as thick as an arm erupted from the ground before binding themselves around Ebenezer. At the same time, a series of wooden walls that were 3 to 4 meters tall appeared in his path. "Anna, Grandpa is leaving soon. He's going to a faraway place. If you're the only one left, I hope you can stay strong. Don't harbor hatred in your heart. You must become a free and kind elf." Joshua gently stroked Anna's face and shook his head with a smile. "Grandpa, where are you going? Can you take Anna with you? Anna is scared to be alone." Anna looked at Joshua in fear and begged, "I'm afraid it won't work this time." Joshua shook his head and pointed at the sky as he said, "High Priestess Helena once said that the end of an elf's life is to return to the sea of stars. Their souls will ascend and become stars in the night sky. If you miss me in the future, Anna, look up at the sky. Grandpa will always be by your side." "I don't want to. I don't want Grandpa to become a star. I want Grandpa to stay by my side. I want Grandpa to stay by Anna's side forever." Anna shook her head. Her tears fell pitifully. "Father, is Grandpa going to die like Mother?" Amy looked up at Meg with a soft voice. "It's not the same. Your mother only lives on the moon. We'll go and bring her back sooner or later." Meg shook his head and gently laid a hand on Amy's head. He looked at Joshua with a heavy heart. If he and Amy were the ones in danger today, he would definitely do everything in his power to save Amy. However, if he were to die, what would happen to Amy? Would he have to bid farewell to her like this? Sally's expression was also a little sorrowful. This was the first time she had come into contact with a pair of wandering elves. She didn't think that they would be separated by life and death in just half a day. Life seemed so fragile at this moment. All of the customers who had just heaved a sigh of relief were all quite sympathetic to this scene. They didn't think that this would be the outcome. "Silly child, Grandpa is getting old, and I'm going to leave you sooner or later. To have such an adorable granddaughter like you, Grandpa's life has been worth it." A resigned smile appeared on Joshua's face. There was also a hint of concern and reluctance in his eyes. He turned to Blower with difficulty and asked in a hoarse voice, "Young Master Blower, can I ask you for a favor?" Blower looked into Joshua's deep and wise eyes and nodded as he replied, "Please go ahead. Anna's parents have already passed away, and I'm also going to die soon. Can you please raise Anna?" Joshua looked into Blower's eyes with an earnest expression. "Grandpa, Anna wants to be by your side. Don't go, don't go." Anna sobbed as she clung onto Joshua's arm and shook her head. "Poor child." Cece looked at Anna with a sympathetic expression before transforming into a white cat and running toward Lulu's big bear form. The two of them were connected by a green ribbon, and Cece said in the druid language, "Lulu, stop him." The big bear was initially evenly matched with all of the demons and orcs, but his aura suddenly soared. He sent an orc flying with a single slap and bashed a demon's head into the ground with a single punch. He then shook off the two demons behind him and rushed toward Ebenezer. He leaped into the air and gave the 6-armed snake demon a bear hug before pinning it to the ground. The 3-meter-tall giant bear and the 6-armed snake demon were instantly embroiled in a fierce battle. The vines that were initially sweeping toward Ebenezer were now sweeping toward the other demons and orcs to prevent them from getting any closer. Blower looked into Joshua's eyes in silence for a while before turning to Anna, who was kneeling beside him with tears streaming down her face. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and the adorable smile on her face during lunch was still fresh in his mind. It had only been half a day, but she had already become so pitiful. Blower was silent for a long while before turning to Joshua with a serious expression and said, "I'll take good care of her and turn her into a kind and free elf." "Thank you." A smile appeared on Joshua's face as he held tightly onto Anna's little hand. He turned back to look at the six-armed snake demon that was battling the big bear and asked, "Do you know why we're being hunted?" "At the very least, I don't believe that he's telling the truth." Blower shook his head. Sally's lips moved, but she remained silent. However, she knew that Joshua had something to say to them, and that included her. She knew that Joshua had something to say to them. They're a mercenary group that specializes in capturing wandering elves. All of the elves that they've captured are being imprisoned 5 kilometers north of Chaos City. They're going to be sent to the Wind Forest to become slaves for all of the major families and warriors for the border guards. All of the elves who resist will be crippled or killed in battle. A mocking smile appeared on Joshua's face as he mustered the last of his strength to continue. The war among species is over, and the demons and orcs are still the ones killing the elves. However, the ones leading the war this time are from the Wind Forest. How laughable. Chapter 5:19. Grandpa. Anna cried as she threw herself onto Joshua's chest. How? How could this be? Sally stumbled back a couple of steps, and her face instantly paled as if she had been struck by lightning. Joshua's words were like a heavy hammer that had struck her heart, and the mocking smile on his face at the end was just as profound as ever. She suddenly understood where the elven slaves in her family had come from. They were all silent, and some of them were disabled. They never told anyone about their past, and their eyes seemed to be forever gray. They had once been free elves, but they had been captured by the people they had once protected and brought back to the Wind Forest in the most vicious way. Their bodies had been imprisoned, and their souls had most likely already died. The education that Sally had received in the past 20 years and the values that she had developed in a major family were completely shattered in that instant. The system that she had always wanted to protect seemed so laughable in that instant. Furthermore, her original plan to bring all of the elves who were roaming the continent back to the Wind Forest had been extremely cruel. The orcs and demons were still harming the elves, but the true culprits behind all of this were the high-ranking elves. How many more elves were still being harmed? Would all of this only stop when the Wind Forest was going to become a giant cage? Anna's sorrowful cries rang in Sally's ears. Her breathing became rapid, and a flame of anger burned in her heart. All of you should just die. Sally's gaze fell on the demons and orcs that were bound by the vines. The blue ring on her right index finger flashed, and a silver longbow appeared in her hand. A quiver full of arrows appeared on her back at the same time. She took out an arrow with her right hand and knocked it on the bow. She aimed at a demon and released the bowstring. The green arrow had 2 intertwining blue ribbons of light on it, and it pierced through the air. No! The demon let out a shrill cry. He wanted to dodge, but the vines under him suddenly tightened, and his legs were tightly bound. Puff! A soft sound of penetration rang out, accompanied by a cry of despair. The arrow instantly pierced through the demon's head, and blood spurted out. The demon slumped to the ground. The second arrow had already left the bowstring and disappeared into the heart of an orc. Whoosh! 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 One arrow after another flew out, and each arrow reaped the life of a demon and an orc. The speed and accuracy of the arrows were astonishing. Sister Aisha is so good. I want to learn archery too. Amy's mouth was slightly agape as she looked at Sally, who was like a god of archery. Meg was also a little surprised. He thought Sally was only a 7th-tier magic caster. He didn't expect her to be so good at archery as well. I didn't expect Ms. Aisha's archery skills to be so terrifying. All of the customers' eyes widened at the sight of this. They had initially thought that Sally was just cold and aloof, but it appeared that her aloof attitude was completely justified. "I'll take good care of her." Blower slowly squatted down beside Joshua and gently caressed Joshua's face before closing his eyes. He looked at Anna, who was crying on Joshua's chest, and fell silent for a moment before rising to his feet. He then turned to the six-armed snake demon that was still battling Lulu, and a hint of killing intent appeared in his eyes. Countless vines erupted from underground before twisting to form a massive hand that was around 5 or 6 meters tall, which swept toward Ebenezer. After taking care of all of the demons and orcs, Sally knocked 3 arrows on her longbow at the same time and aimed them at Ebenezer. A hint of panic appeared in Ebenezer's triangular eyes. Just Big Bear alone was already difficult for him to deal with. Now, he was being targeted by 2 7th-tier magic casters at the same time. All of his subordinates were lying in pools of blood, and the stench of blood wafted through the air. "Retreat." Cece let loose a faint cry. Lulu slammed the 6-armed snake demon into the ground with a palm, and at the same time, stomped on its body to evade to the side. A massive green hand that was around 5 or 6 meters tall abruptly came crashing down. The 3 arrows formed a line, and the tips of the arrows were shimmering with light. "No." Ebenezer, who had almost been knocked unconscious by Big Bear's palm, let loose a roar. Many layers of protective barriers appeared around his body, and he also raised his weapon to defend himself. However, his face was filled with despair. In his haste, there was no way that he would be able to defend himself against the full-force attacks of 2 magic casters of the same tier. The 3 arrows pierced through the layers of protective barriers, and the first 2 arrows shattered. However, the final arrow had already pierced through and was hurtling directly toward Ebenezer's glabella. The massive green hand had also come crashing down. A sharp spike that was around 1/2 meter in length protruded from the palm, and its tip was shimmering with a dark green light. Big Bear turned to look at him, maintaining a pouncing posture, as if it were ready to deliver a lethal blow at any moment. This guy was already dead. That was the thought that flashed through everyone's minds. However, right at this moment, the ground suddenly began to tremor slightly. A massive wild boar that was close to 2 meters tall emerged from the bushes and hurtled toward Lulu like a heavy truck. At the same time, a ball-like figure darted out of the bushes and landed in front of Ebenezer. A fat hand reached out and grabbed the arrow that was about to land between Ebenezer's eyebrows. The figure raised a huge black shield in its left hand and swung it at the giant green hand that came crashing down. Lulu was knocked flying over a dozen meters by the wild boar, and she stumbled to the ground. Her chest had caved in slightly, and she had no idea how many of her ribs had been broken. She looked at the massive wild boar with crimson eyes with a grim expression. The rapidly spinning arrow was caught by the massive hand, and it was unable to advance any further. After a momentary stalemate, it shattered into wisps of wood that drifted down from the massive hand. The massive green hand that was covered in sharp spikes landed on the massive black shield, and a dull thump rang out. The spikes in the palm snapped inch by inch, and they then protruded upward from the center of the palm before exploding with a loud boom. The intertwined vines were severed into countless segments in midair, and they fell to the ground like a green rain. "Say, you little brats, bullying my brother with numbers like this is a little unreasonable, isn't it?" The round shield was slowly lowered, and a fat black demon that was as round as a ball appeared in front of Ebenezer. He had an oily head, and he looked at everyone with a sinister smile. "You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.